Welcome back to Dangerous Rhetoric, everyone. This is episode 124. I'm Dan.
I'm Brentley.
That's Brent over there. I pointed the wrong direction.
Yes, my camera's not in the right place. I'm sorry.
It's been a while, about a month, but thank you to everyone who waited for our next episode. We are going to continue on the same beat of our last episode, and we wanted to continue covering the story of what happened last year at Project Veritas. For those who watched our last episode with our friend Callan, who was the former senior creative producer there, he shared his testimony about his experiences with the organization and James O'Keefe and what actually happened that resulted in them parting ways. Well, after the episode came out, James never responded to it. We did invite him to come share his side, on Twitter. We tweeted at him. He ignored the entire story. We informed a few journalists in the conservative or, right-wing media market sphere about Callan's testimony and the story, and they also ignored it and no one wanted to cover it. So we figured we would stay on the same beat, and that inspired us to speak to even more people who worked at Project Veritas and knew James O'Keefe about their side of things and what happened there. Frankly, I think Callan's testimony was very fair. I think anyone who watches it will see that he's not trying to tear down James, and he simply wanted to just report on what happened personally to him and what he experienced. But some of the people here might not be as nice as Callan. And we want to hear their perspective as well, because we think it's worth listening to, especially because a lot of other content creators don't seem to want to talk to you guys. So with all of that said, I'm welcoming on the show three guests today. We have Daniel Strack, who is the former executive director of Project Veritas. We have Matthew Tyrmand, who is a former member of the Project Veritas board of directors. And we have a former Project Veritas journalist, Christian Hartsock. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us today.
Our pleasure.
Absolutely.
You did a great job with Callan, so we're excited to be on and help clarify the opera we all lived through last year a little bit more granularly.
The opera, yeah, I've heard Callan sort of described it as like a Grecian tragedy.
Yeah. Oh, totally.
And I thought that was a really interesting way to put it. But I find the story fascinating, I guess, because I know Callan, he's my friend, so I saw how it personally affected him, and that's where my interest came in the story. But, when we started to talk about the other angle of it, and as people who were fans of James O'Keefe, mind you, Brent and I were longtime fans. People can look back at our show and stuff that we've said online, and they can find we were very supportive of the organization and the work that he was doing with them. When we started to try to talk about the other angle, or maybe that there was more to the story, we received backlash from people. And now more recently, it's being insinuated by James that we're part of some sort of a sophisticated information operation, quote unquote, along with
truth,
along with former FBI agent and whistleblower Kyle Seraphin, who has also been publicly criticizing James. So we figured we were going to just dig more into this and talk to you guys. But before we jump into what happened last year, I want to get a little backstory of each of you, which I like to do on the show, and just to learn about you guys. Because although we know Callan, we've never spoken to any of you besides, say, some social media exchanges. And I don't know too much about you guys, although I have looked you up and read a bit. So let's get some of that. I'm going to start with Dan, because you joined the organization the latest. Where are you from, Dan? What did you study? How did you get involved with journalism and becoming the general director at Project Veritas?
Yeah, born and raised New Jersey, still here in Central Jersey, and background in computer science, really my really passionate technology geek all my life. And so I'm a Bachelor of Science in Computer Science. I studied in Baltimore Loyola College, and moved on to interning at a small Wall Street firm that eventually got bought by Goldman Sachs. And so I spent 25 years on Wall Street, 22 of which at Goldman. And after that time was over, and I, by the way, I did not leave voluntarily, just full transparency here. I was a managing director, 12 of us got let go, normal sort of thing, cycle of business that happens. The management, comes in, changes things. And so I found myself kind of surprised. Nobody was crying for me. I sort of needed to work, but I could pick my spots and figure out what I wanted to do when I grow up. So started a few different businesses and working with friends to bring some of our sort of dreams to life. Started a distillery. We've got a little restaurant food truck business. We got some cool little things that I could never do when I was at Goldman. And then I started really understanding that, here I am helping my friends, run their businesses, start their businesses. But it's not really necessarily like these, I'm passionate about them, but it's not necessarily what I, sort of completely fulfilling me. So I've always had I had my eyes open for something that I can have profound change, profound positive change. I started looking at nonprofits. I started looking at the Children's Health Defense Fund. RFK Jr. was incredibly intriguing to me. My son is autistic. He's on the autism spectrum, and the Children's Health Defense Fund had a lot of very interesting things to say about that. So I've been following them for a while. Looked at a few other organizations. Nothing really struck me. There was no really good role that was open at any of those places. And my brother and I, Thanksgiving before I applied to Project Veritas, the few months after the Kyle Rittenhouse trial had been sort of over and controversy had gone through, and it doesn't even matter which side of the story either of us was on. I have a small family. It's my brother and I. We're super close. He's 4 years younger than me. We don't fight. Like, we were never the kids who we never fought in school. Like, I never picked on him. He never picked on me. We always got along, and we always still do. We found ourselves on the opposite end of this argument, and not a debate, not an open debate at all, an argument about this Kyle Rittenhouse thing. And it was very clear to me that we were both watching two different news channels, and neither of us had the full story. Mm-hmm. I've never thrown a punch in my life, and I'm proud of that. I've never been in a physical fight. My almost 80-year-old mother got in between my brother and I because it looked like it was going to go there.
Wow.
That struck the next day. We made up, and it was all good. We got past it. However, it stuck with me in such a profound way that I realized the media was so screwed up. And what if I could do something that can impact that? Didn't know what. Saw James's video after Project Veritas had gotten berated by the FBI that he did at the Mohonk House in front of this fireplace, which later on the next year, I actually went and spent time with James in that same room in front of that fireplace. I started looking up Project Veritas, and I'd known of them. I'd seen stories. I wasn't a super close follower, but I knew of them, and I knew a bunch of the important stories that they'd broken. And I should sort of back up and say, I'm not a political animal. I've probably followed politics, I suspect, like a lot of people, way more, deeply than in the past handful of years than I ever have. But I would not classify myself as conservative or right wing. I certainly wouldn't classify myself as a Democrat. I've been registered independent my entire life. I've voted both sides of the aisle and third parties. So I started watching tons and tons of Project Veritas content, looking up James. It turns out he grew up in the town next door to the town I grew up in, and he grew up in Westwood, New Jersey. I grew up in Park Ridge. We knew some of the same people. We almost had 1 degree of separation.
Elizabeth, right here, Union County.
Okay, there you go. Yeah. So we're 12 years. I'm 51. He's 12 years younger than me. But we're both Eagle Scouts. I've got my stuff hanging back there. So I found these sort of like all these things that were, that I could sort of identify with this guy. And then I went to his LinkedIn profile. And the last post he had posted was he's looking for a number 2. He's looking for a COO. Went to the website, saw the executive director position open, which is essentially 501c3 parlance for COO. And I applied. It was a Wednesday, middle of January, I think. It was before the Project Veritas experience in Miami. Mm-hmm. 2 of our human resources people contacted me the next morning. And we started a months-long, multiple Zoom calls, telephone calls, in-person meetings. I went to Miami. My plan was actually that if they didn't respond to me, I was going to bring my resume, buy a VIP ticket, meet James. Like, why didn't you call me? And that was my plan. But they called me within 12 hours. And so the story goes, the human resources folks were literally on the phone with each other. They had exhausted their search. They came to the last resume. They said no to everybody. And then my resume popped in. And then we started talking. I started April of that year. Met James a number of times before that. And I guess we'll go on to the rest of the story later. But
So that'll be April 2022, correct?
That'd be April 2022, right?
Okay.
Yeah, the raid was November 2021, right? Yeah.
Yeah. And then Callan started a year before that. He was in
That's right.
April 2020.
The raid was 2021 after
Yeah.
the election. So yeah, not 2020.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we'll move on to Matt. Matthew, where did you grow up? Where do you come from? What did you study? And how did you meet James? And how did you get involved in Project Veritas?
Well, that's a long story, but I'll
sum it up. Yeah.
So I started working for Goldman Sachs. No, I'm just kidding. We bust Stan Falls a lot about that. There's an old joke. How do you know somebody worked at Goldman Sachs? They will tell you.
They will tell you.
I'm guilty of it.
You did great, though. You got to the second line. First, you talked about college. Then you talked about I was waiting for it, and you managed to go like 12 words previous.
I'm guilty.
I grew up in Brooklyn. I was born outside Chicago, but I grew up in Brooklyn from the age of 4 on, a not so proud survivor of the New York City disastrous public school system. Went to college in Chicago, went to Wall Street, was always kind of going to Wall Street. Always politically active, as I do a lot of podcasts. There's a lot of stuff I've discussed about my family history. Father was an anti-communist dissident in Poland, and he died when I was 4, much older, survived the Nazis, the commies, and the New York liberals, which is why I was born in the Midwest.
I think I recall reading a bit about that. He was a writer, too, if I recall.
Yeah, writer, and one of the only writers who did not bow to the communist censors within the Iron Curtain. And as a result, now is a legend. Streets named after him in most cities in Poland. We just did a movie about one of his Christians muted. Just did a.
And I was going to say there's a great movie came out last year entitled Philip, Philip, and it's both adapted from Leopold Tyrmand from a book that Matt's dad wrote, which was semi-autobiographical. So it's also
yeah, I highly. I flogged
it's a fantastic movie. It's a fantastic movie.
Definitely send me the link. I would.
Yeah, I will. Well, thank you for helping me flog it, Christian. I co-produced this movie, and we'll get to me running away and escaping to Europe, because that was part of the narrative. I had a movie premiere to do in Warsaw, right in March 2023. So that was 6 months on the calendar. So that was an autobiographical novel of his life during the war as a Polish Jew, passed himself off as a Polish Frenchman, and served the Nazis in Frankfurt, which was the capital of the Reich at the time. And this movie's won awards all over Europe, and it's on Netflix now, which makes it accessible, which is great.
Cool. Okay.
So I grew up understanding my father's history, but not being directly involved in politics and political philosophy. I was Wall Street, grew up in New York, inner city Brooklyn kid, fascinated by the city and markets. And so I went to Wall Street, and I actually met O'Keefe when I started getting involved in more public policy type stuff. I joined the Manhattan Institute. They had a program for young professionals in New York, and I met him. This was coming right off the heels of New Orleans when he was under house arrest in Jersey, but he was able to go, he had a very sympathetic PO, parole officer. So when he always says that he was, totally enslaved by the system and house arrest, he was able to go back and forth. And I met him at the Manhattan Institute event, and I'd already seen Acorn. I'd already been, I operated sort of a closed-end blog on Wall Street that went to all the trading desks, where I basically just clipped articles and weighed in, and it was about 600-700 people, all finance types, righties, obviously, a lot of Wall Street sort of, the people like myself who were working the Wall Street grind at the trading desk between 6 and 7 every day, and then out drinking into the wee hours, client entertainment, we called it.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah, well, you were footing the bill, and I thank you for your service. And so I met O'Keefe then, and I, started distributing his stuff back before he was very, very well known. This was post Acorn, post New Orleans, and I ended up leaving Wall Street formally in 2011-12 because I was just sick of not to get too deep into the macro markets, I was a fundamental analyst, and the government was intervening in markets after 2008 and 9 in such a way that I felt like a vestigial organ. I could not do what I wanted to do with my skill set. So I just left and started trading my own money and getting involved in other things, got involved.
What year was that? You said 20.
That was 11, 12. I think it was the very end of 11, beginning of 12, because I went from a fund I was at for 7 years to a prop firm, and I just did not like the markets.
It's interesting because that was around the time of the Occupy Wall Street protests.
In fact, I was working for a prop firm on Water Street, which is downtown. I only spent about 5-6 months there. This was also the tail end of the European debt crisis because I was sort of covering that as a macro analyst. And Occupy Wall Street was going on in Zuccotti Park, literally 2 blocks away, where I would get on the 456 to go to my place because I lived in the East Village, so I'd take that up to Union Square.
I was there the night of that first day. I went later on, and I had some friends who were there occupying and doing all that.
I walked around. I talked to people a few times, and I wasn't a journalist at that point. We're all journalists, and Christian and I, and we always talked about at PV the philosophy of journalism. But I just walked around talking to people, and they really, I understood the popular discontent, but they lost me when they kept trying to sell me about how great Cuba was. So it was almost like a cartoon factory to me. But so I left Wall Street and got involved in public policy projects and the quote unquote conservative movement. And then I started this came on the heels of me starting to go back and forth to Poland, which I started in 2010, got citizenship. And actually my journalism really began in Poland, writing about what my perception of what was going on in the Polish government and the corruption. And I started kind of engaging that. And then I got involved with an organization called Open the Books in Chicago that was started as a state-based C4 in Illinois focused on corruption, state and moving to federal, and then migrated it to a national C3. And I started working with them. That's when I got really much more deeply involved as a full-time thing. And so O'Keefe and I had a friendship. And so then we started talking about some of the ideas on the things we're working on as sort of journalists, forensic investigators. I was doing the OSINT and forensic side, sort of numerology, the accounting of federal spending and local and state expenditures, and obviously what O'Keefe and PV were doing. And I remember we worked on a project with the National Urban League. I think that was in 13 or 14 around Obamacare navigators. And that's when I started going into the office, and he asked me to join the board. At that point, there were only 3 board members. There was always basically statutory minimums because it's not a high risk, idea to be on a board that's ruffling feathers of a nonprofit of this structure. And so I joined.
Which we will get into that too.
Yeah, we'll get into that certainly. And I joined the board, and this was when there were 7 people. This was a small organization. This was when we were in the old building in Mamaroneck, not the new office, which you guys, Dan and Christian, have seen.
I visited once. Yeah.
And this was. I remember I interviewed Russ Verney, who was like the first real executive director after Dan Francisco, who was pushed out by James or resigned, complicated situation that also ended badly. And it's funny because I remember when I joined the board, I won't say her name, but a woman who was working as a legal counsel who ended up having a much better career. She whispered to me, as I was coming in to join the board and actually fill out docs, and she was resigning and saying, fuck this, you will grow to hate him. And I messaged her in February.
What?
This was in 2014. So 10 years later, I messaged her, I DM'd her, and I'd seen her a few times because she's had a very high level career. I'm going to keep her name out of it. I messaged, and I'd seen her, and I'd seen her even in the last year or two and seen like how bad she knew how bad the shit was. But I messaged her, I said, you were right. And she goes, what are you talking about? I reminded her, she whispered this in my ear as I was walking in and she was walking out. And I said, you're right. So
that is crazy.
We have a long, there's so much history here. It's Falstaff, it's Wagner, it's an opera. There's a lot of great history that I'm sure we will delve into. But, I joined the board, and, I was there when it was, 6, 7 people. And most of those people were gone. The only ones who were there on premises that were still there through the entire cycle were Freddie, the producer, the guy who did all the editing, who was there from the very beginning. He was not a very political guy. It was a job, but it became his career. He was very good at what he did. But there was really no continuity. And all the people who were there at that point, Steve Gordon, Dan Francisco, this woman, Jennifer Ridgely, who was, what I perceived was the first employee he had been banging, but there had been others that predate that.
Oh, it just got spicy.
I'm radical transparency that's it. It's a brand because that's who I am. I don't work for anybody, and you know what? The truth's a bitch. Fuck it. Yeah. So it's gonna get spicy. But I'd heard from some other employees of that time. Apparently, there are emails that I'd love to see that he was offering jobs to secretaries in exchange for like casting couch type stuff. Nobody should be surprised with everything that y'all.
Interesting. So you started as on the board, what was it? We'll say 2013, 2014.
I started engaging with PV directly in 13. I think I signed the board docs it would have been late 13 or early 14.
So you were there a good 10 years before.
Yeah, I was the longest serving board member. I was the longest serving person outside essentially two people, Freddie and Christian.
Yeah.
Christian going back to, the Breitbart days, and Freddie having predated me by a year or so.
Yeah, and I think it is important for people to realize the context of this, that you were James's friend. You guys weren't just working together. You guys knew each other very closely for a long time.
Two best friends, myself, and I found, by the way, in a pile of shit I was going through last week, a card he gave me asking me to be his groomsman. So, and I can show it. I think it's pretty funny. He said, it was my birthday, and he said, "Happy birthday, Matt. Would you be my groomsman at this wedding or the next, James?" Which I think is very funny and telling.
At this wedding or the next?
I guess at that point, he already knew he was going to get caught for cheating on his fiance. So. I mean, the wedding that never happened, right? I mean, on February 20th, there was no wedding. What?
I mean, Christmas party.
I was wondering about that.
We can already tell who's going to have all the spiciest things to say in this.
It's called The Truth. And by the way, I've been holding, and the truth is always stranger than fiction. You can't make some of the shit up. I've been holding, obviously having conversations with people, but like not doing anything on record until you guys. And we've been talking about it for months. I like your pod. I like your guys' just personalities, and you seem, and you had a great, instinctively, you guys, and honestly, crazy Carlin Borisenko, the only people who I know off the deep end, but she had a good read on this, just given her focus as a
she was basically the only other one who was covering this angle and wanted to talk about what the other
organizational psychologist. When I spoke to her, she said, "I literally focus on narcissistic leadership in the workplace as like my academic and professional work as an organizational psychologist." So she got it pretty quick. But so, we've been talking about this, all of us, for many, many months, and it's great it came together with, Dan, who was, sort of represents the C-suite and management and sort of head of on-the-ground operations with the org. Myself as the longest-serving board member, James's best friend involved in this. Christian knew him longer than anybody else, being there, since the Breitbart days and the first journalist. So and Callan, who was, such a senior producer based on merit, who was in it the sort of every aspect of the inner workings of the output and inside behind the curtain at the office, and just a very rational, very Scandinavian, rational person.
Very, very stoic, very Scandinavian, very cool under pressure for the most part. I mean, I've seen him get like a little, I worked on a short film with him, and I've seen him like get a little snippy with people, but that's what makes him good as a producer.
You know what he gets snippy with?
Everyone's doing the thing they should be doing.
Sometimes you gotta get snippy.
Incompetence, laziness, missed deadline, then he gets snippy.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
And it's he has an efficiency about him. He's not emotional.
Constantly reminding people about the deadline, like, hey, we only have the space until this time. We have to do this, and this. We can't be dilly-dallying because we only have until this time. We can't rent the space again, et cetera, et cetera. But just the way he can take all these moving pieces and make sure it all fits together and everyone's doing what they should be doing to make something happen. And I think, after I saw him in producer mode, that was when it, clicked later on as to why James tried so hard to poach him. It's like, I get it now. You really lost a powerful asset, a really important worker.
He also tried to poach a lot of people because he wanted to create an optical army of loyalists. Again, I dealt with this with James for years on personnel. I interviewed, especially senior people, and I just watched over and over again as I gave him this analogy when we were on his boat one time. I said, people are not screwdrivers. After I watched him jimmy his engine that he had flooded with a screwdriver to sort of unflood it from, the gas or the water it took on, and I'm no expert on boat engines. And I said, you literally look at the people, your staff, as that screwdriver, and you constantly try and fit round pegs into square holes. And I remember there were people where it's like, there's no way you should hire this person. This person has no competence for what you're plugging him into. But anytime he met somebody who said, I can do this, he said, okay, my problem solved. I'm plugging them in, with no sort of discernment or circumspection, because it was always what he wanted. Not what it is, but what he wanted. And that is also a hallmark of a narcissist.
Image over substance.
Yeah.
Image over substance. Well, on that note, and you mentioned it earlier, of the three of you, Christian goes the furthest back with James and with Project Veritas, and you were there from day one. So let's get some of your backstory. Like, where are you from, Christian? How did you get involved in journalism, and when did you meet James? And yeah.
Well, I grew up in Oakland, California, and I was in film school. Filmmaking has always been my passion since I was a little kid, as far back as I can remember. I went to film school, and I had shortly graduated film school this was 2009, and a mutual acquaintance who I met at a party. It was actually at the California Republican Convention, 2008. I met this guy called Ryan, and he, it was like at a after party of CRs, and he asked me what I did, and I said, well, I just graduated film school, and he's like, oh, you should meet my friend James. He does videos. And at the time, this was before Acorn. No one, if you Googled James, and this is the keyboard, if you Googled James O'Keefe, it pulled up some blog about sustainable eating or something. It says James O'Keefe was not a Googleable person at the time. But there was one thing I remember as I was driving to school in 2008. There was a report about a racist person who had called in Planned Parenthood, claiming to be a racist donor who wanted to earmark a large donation for a Planned Parenthood clinic in the Black community because he was afraid of his white kid getting edged out of college admissions by too many Black kids. And I was like, that's either horribly evil or horribly brilliant. So I wasn't clear if it was a prank or not, or if it was like an actual whatever. But and this acquaintance of mine, Ryan, was like, oh, yeah, he called Planned Parenthood. I was like, I heard that. That was brilliant. I guess that was brilliant, as it turns out. So yeah, I'd love to meet that guy. Ryan sent the trailer to my thesis film to James O'Keefe. My thesis film was called Sycophant.
Ironic.
It was a film that I had written and directed, and and it's on the web if you guys want to watch it. It's an old classic. It doesn't hold a candle to Slasher 3. Those who know. But I'll never top Slasher 3. But anyway, so James was very impressed with my thesis film, and it was Sycophant, and he reached out to me and was like, "Hey, Christian, this is late 2008. This is like he's like, oh yeah, this is November." He reaches out to me and he's like, "Hey, I saw your film, or at least the trailer. I was very impressed with the production quality. And I have some video ideas. Can we get on a telephone call, in the next, how's January the 9th at 4 p.m. Eastern work for you?" And I was like, sure. I mean, it's November right now. There was kind of a culture clash here with I'm this kind of laid back California guy, and like, yeah, sure, we can get on the phone later today. But James is like, let us schedule a call for January the 9th at 4 p.m. And I was like, oh, sure. So anyway, we talked, we hit it off on the phone. We talked, I told him my film ideas. He told me his film ideas, video ideas. One of them was Acorn, and then we just kind of like had quarterly phone calls for, throughout the year of 2009. And he told me about this Acorn idea I said, that was brilliant. It was more just kind of like brainstorms. How can we work together? How can we put our heads together? What are your ideas? What are my ideas? And then in 2009 or September, fast forward to August of 2009, James is coming into town, and he gets a hold of me, and it's where he invites me to this club in West Hollywood where it's 80s night. And he calls me up, and our mutual friend is, he's riding in my mutual friend's car, and they're going to come pick me up. We're going to go to this club in West Hollywood. and James is like, do you have any penny loafers that I could borrow? Because I intend to do the moonwalk at this. I was like, I don't have any penny loafers. I have some Sperry's, I guess. Whatever. So I lent him some Sperry's. Anyway, we went, and we went. Our very first night together was.
I was about to say, like, that wasn't a red flag back then. I know Matt's gonna love that joke. Yes, for the penny loafer.
So many red flags.
So anyway, So anyway, the next morning we went to breakfast, and he showed me this videotapes that he had taken of this acorn, intercut with some B-roll that was shot in, of him and Hannah Giles. And he showed me these, and it was like cringe comedy. I thought it was brilliant. I was like, well, this is like something. It was like I remember likening it to a Christopher Guest movie. It was very just like kind of documentary style, but funny and cringe and like cringe humor. And I'm like, this is cinematizing journalism in a way I've never seen before. And I told him that. And I said, I really like the interstitial footage, and he was like, which is my impression of James, Anyway, so that's an affectionate impression. So he was like, well, can you shoot some more of that? I've got a girl down in Huntington Beach, Hannah Giles, and will you go shoot some B-roll, that we can add to this? And that was my first job for James O'Keefe. That was actually my first job out of film school, was shooting Hannah Giles, strutting her stuff on the pier of Huntington Beach, August 2009. There's a picture of, and who was there is, what's her name? What's her name? Who's on The View now? Liz.
Alyssa Farah.
Alyssa Farah was there.
Yeah, Joe Farah's daughter. Her and Hannah were very close.
Yeah, me and Alyssa Farah and Hannah Giles on Huntington Beach Pier. And that was my first gig. It was just shooting the interstitial of Hannah Giles pretending to be a prostitute that was intercut with B-roll. Anyway, erstwhile, I'm going to have to speed this up because I'm really getting into the weeds. Erstwhile, I was, this is total coincidence. I had Evan Sayet, who I had also met at the 2008 Republican Convention, California Republican Convention. He sponsored me into Friends of Abe, which was a secret society of conservatives in the entertainment industry, and that's where I met. It was John Voight, it was Gary Sinise, it was David Mamet, it was what's the Wheaties guy who changed his sex?
Caitlyn Jenner.
Yeah, Bruce, who was Bruce Jenner at the time.
Bruce Jenner.
Yeah, Robert Davi. It was, and Andrew Breitbart. Andrew Breitbart was the big man on campus because the Acorn tape thing. Andrew Breitbart and I kind of became friends. And I started working for David Jaggett, who had co-founded Right Network with Kelsey Grammer, which was a right of center entertainment platform.
Interesting. I love Frasier. Now I got to go watch some Frasier.
Yeah. My mom loved it. Yeah.
John Garvey just posted a photo on social media with Kelsey Grammer yesterday.
Oh.
Boo you, Brent. You have bad taste. Frasier's awesome.
Sitcoms are terrible.
What? No, Frasier's great. I love that dry British humor.
All right, sorry.
So through that, I met Chris Burgard, who became kind of my mentor. And Chris Burgard sent me to CPAC. He sent me to, and basically I was hired on to Right Network as a producer, which basically meant I was doing a lot of videography at the time. So I went to CPAC 2010, which was like, I consider that the Woodstock of the new media conservative movement was CPAC 2010. If you were there, you know what I'm talking about. That's where, anyway, so I started doing like my own undercover journalism. So Chris Burgard sent me to this rally in Palm Springs that was being headlined by Van Jones. This is 2011, early 2011. And this was right after the Citizens United ruling, and this group called Common Cause had organized all these liberals to, and the Koch brothers were in town, and so there was all these lefties who had congregated in a parking lot to yell at the building that the Koch brothers were staying in, and I was just there to do videography, but James had kind of inspired me to take this undercover approach. So I thought, well, what would happen if I go up to these people and say, I had an Obama t-shirt, and I said, what happens if I go up to these people and say, what do we do with Clarence Thomas after we impeach him? Well, every single response had something to do with nooses, ropes, fields, string him up, put him back in the field, string Ginny up, cut off his toes and feed them to him. I'm all about peace, but I would say torture. And mind you, at the time, this was 2 years into the Tea Party movement, where we had the Democrat media complex constantly saying that, racist, violent race. This was 2 weeks after the Tucson shooting, where Jared Luffner had shot Gabby Giffords, and the narrative was, clearly it's the Tea Party that inspired this with their racist, violent rhetoric, and Sarah Palin's PAC had a surveyor symbol thing, so which clearly he must have seen that and then shut. So anyway, there was zero evidence of any. Andrew Breitbart even went on TV after Elijah Cummings. This is dangerous. I don't want to say the wrong names, but those two black congressmen had claimed that they had been spat on by Tea Partiers on the steps of the Capitol, and Andrew Breitbart went on television and said, "I will donate $100,000 to anyone who can produce video of the spitballs." And they hadn't. So for 2 years, the mainstream media had not produced a single shred of evidence. I found everything in 2 hours. Okay, at this rally that of racist, violent rhetoric amongst white liberals that the mainstream media had been trying to find on the Tea Party for 2 years. So anyway, that video really put me on the map, especially with Andrew Breitbart. And Andrew Breitbart kind of was like very, he loved me for that video, and he took me under his wing and ended up hiring me. And while I was at Breitbart.com, Breitbart News, I was also maintaining relations with James, I was kind of a creative producer with James. I produced Teachers Unions Gone Wild, and also Landry Dance, which I put in the chat, which was this sort of Michael Jackson style "F you to the establishment" video that James and I did right after his arrest from New Orleans in New Orleans.
Yeah, I was watching this the other day, and I'm like, oh, so you were always the theater kid. You were the theater kid from the beginning. This is basically the precursor to oligarchy. This is like the first.
Yeah.
No, there were so many. There for years early on in the PV, every production had a musical intro, interludes, and outros. And I mean, I remember some of them were so ridiculous, they detracted from the journalism. And I remember I had friends of mine, who were telling me, they're like, this is kind of interesting journalism. These were not like conservative movement activists. These were total normies who were seeing it on my social media. And they were like, and I'm talking Facebook back then. And they were saying, this is really cool journalism, but what's with the music? And I remember, I think it was 17, I was with James in St. Louis for a conference he was speaking at, and I was speaking at, and there was a bunch of Europeans there. And I remember I said to him, I was like, dude, like the music stuff it's detracting from the journalism. And it was the first time he got really angry with me, and he started screaming at me, don't shit on my art. And I'm like, are you an artist or are you a journalist?
Yeah.
And
this is where you're gonna
reduce these.
Sorry, this is where you're going to encounter some intellectual diversity amongst us, because I enabled this. I admittedly enabled this trajectory, this creative trajectory. Remember, I came out of film school.
Well, we discussed this with Callan too, and just like you, Callan came out of film school. He approaches things from that film angle, and Callan even said like James felt that he understood his vision, because Callan wasn't against this stuff either, but he did agree that it had to be done in the right way, properly.
Right.
And as he mentioned in our conversation with him, a lot of people were suggesting, as Matt suggested, that maybe he should just separate those things. You know, keep the journalism with PV as the nonprofit, and then start your for-profit to do the other stuff.
but but that's the thing that attracted me about Acorn was this fusion
Yes.
of this performance art with journalism.
It is arguably what made PV unique as well.
Yeah, and
the journalism itself was so good, and it
yes. Okay, there we go.
It looked like he wanted the journalism as a predicate so he could do the performance, which, I've spoken to one journalist who actually coined this concept that I've adopted, which is that he was never really purely a journalist. He was a theatrical actor, LARPing as a journalist, saying that's the role he was going to play. And if you look at like this 5 years of stuff where it was like all about, there was more effort on his end on the show tunes, on the productions, and the theater values of these intros and outros and interludes than there was on the journalism. The journalism was like the filler to catalyze an excuse to do a musical number.
Well, there's another thing worth, like you're watching this video right here. Now, what you're seeing is faux cockiness. It's like it's self-deprecate. It's like a paradoxically self-deprecate because it's obviously he's when Cenk Uygur did a comment, he's like, oh my God, this is so cringe. Does he actually think this is cool? No, you idiot. It's supposed to be kind of self-deprecating and faux cocky, and it's not actually it's like I don't know how to explain it.
At some point, the self-deprecation actually was replaced by delusion and the belief that this was legitimate artistic talent when it was comic relief. And, Mr. Aspergery narcissist never got the memo that the comic relief is not serious theatrical, content that should be winning Tonys, the Broadway awards. It's mostly crap, even if it is somewhat funny, laugh at or laugh with. And it did detract from the journalism at one point. I remember the Washington, D.C. stories, the series of Exposing the Deep State, which had some amazing, amazing stuff. Exposed people working on the taxpayer's dime while organizing for DSA. That is groundbreaking stuff. But the intro with a bunch of people in fedoras and trench coats on the mall, that was what excited him, not the journalism. It's like I get to moonwalk up the National Mall. And that was what I brought it to him. I was like, dude, this is going a little far. You're ascending to this point where the journalistic vision is great. The undercover stuff, the modern day muckraking, I'm going to shit on James a lot because he's one of the worst human beings in the history of the world. But I will not denigrate the fact that with a vision of undercover journalism, taking the history and the analysis, and he's not a moron, he's highly intelligent, and academically he can absorb huge amounts of data. He really studied journalistic philosophy and ethics and studied the history of muckraking and what we were doing with technology in the 21st century and bringing a new form of muckraking to a society that is so far gone with excesses, much like the muckrakers of the 1880s and 1890s in the post-industrial era, where exposing the nasty underbelly of what society had become led to smart regulation and a recalibration of social values. Very, very important work. And this had the potential to really do that in full, but he could not get away from the cult of personality that he was building that obviously culminated in the blow up of it's all about me, 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 me. I need to be the spotlight. And we'll talk about later the Pfizer stuff, because Dan was sitting there when the Fox News stuff was going on. And that was really telling about the cult of personality. He didn't give a shit about the story. The story existed to facilitate him being on camera and having rose petals thrown at his feet, the adulation. And so that was what, that cult of personality growing from, especially when Trump came into office and that political access, it ran amok, and it ran amok in the culture of the organization. And that's when people started becoming whistleblowers and saying, enough's enough. So you can't force so many people to act in your musical theater wet dream orgasm fucking deliveries. And when they signed on to do undercover journalism or break incredible stories that saved our country, saved humanity, and that's what he was forcing people to do, which is why they finally broke. I happened to be the one they got to fucking call every day, and I was the one who had to fight these fights, which is why I was the one who, he had to pillory, because I was the guy who was trying to check to basically induce a little balance. But the Pfizer stuff we talk about in a bit is, it was insane what went on there. That was right before the blow up.
But just to finish,
your views.
Pardon?
No, I'll let Christian speak first. Yeah, I was.
So anyway, so Andrew Breitbart died. I was the last to see him in the office the night he died, and and then, you know, shortly thereafter, I went to, you know, and throughout all this, I continued to do film production outside of journalism, but then, you know, I ended up mainly doing stuff with James for the next few years, and then Project Veritas was created the year after Andrew died. You know, it was Veritas Visuals prior to that, and I broke a few of the big stories. Democracy Partners was one of my biggest, at least. That's where I got Scott Fovel telling me in Wisconsin about how he and his boss Bob Creamer were Hillary Clinton, where they were working for Hillary Clinton and sending bird doggers to Trump rallies to incite violence, and that was
far and away the biggest story of PV up until that moment, and I still think it's the second after the Pfizer. The impact and the catalyst for leveling PV up from that was massive. I mean, that exposed something really key. I remember James called me when I think it was Sinclair spiked it. Because they were worried about the confirmation, the blowback, the fact we were going into the White House, the Clinton campaign, Bob Creamer, Jan Schakowsky's husband. And I remember I was walking in my neighborhood when James called me, and it was like, so we'll just release it on our own. This is bigger than needing a springboard media placement to get it attention. And that's what we ended up doing, and it ended up working. I'd say the Somali voter fraud was also one of the biggest stories. And you know they're big when you get the blowback of the mainstream media apparatus going to war with both you, as in PV, and us, and the narrative of the story, them running interference by calling it fake when it's incontrovertibly not fake. And I'd say those were the big three, were Pfizer, Scott Fovel, Democracy Partners, and Somali voter fraud.
And ironically, though, Democracy Partners, and I think had Democracy Partners, had we broken that a year later, it would have been different. But it was like at the very end of an era where the mainstream media, it made the front page of the New York Times twice on opening week. And Anderson Cooper had a panel with Van Jones on that panel, who a year later I would be, you know, getting on tape telling me the Russia thing was a big nothing burger. But Van Jones even saying, if it wasn't coming from Pinocchio, I'd say this looks pretty bad. Like, and the entire panel was like, yeah, this is pretty bad.
And much like Somali voter fraud, it was confirming something we knew. Anybody who'd been to a Trump rally knew these things, you know, and I have got, you know, mixed records with the whole MAGA movement, but I, you know, very much believed in, you know, what it was building as a populist reactionary pendulum shift, especially in 15, 16, 17. And everybody who's at Trump rallies would be like, much like the Tea Party that it grew out of, they were like, it was huggy, it was multiracial, multi-ethnic. It was, you know, everybody was there for one reason, which is they believe in the Constitution, or, you know, for the Tea Party, it was really tax enough already about economic issues and the bank bailouts, thanks Daniel Strack and Goldman Sachs, and Hank Paulson and Geithner and all of your crony boondoggle friends. But just kidding, they suck. You're awesome. But
my point is that
we knew it was confirming something we knew, that something was amiss when the coverage was coming up that Trump rallies had this violence. It was right. So our side really knew. So that's why it had such critical mass, because you had a built-in audience that was like, yes, I expected it was something like this. I couldn't put my finger on it. And you contextualized it, which was one of the all-time greats in PV history, out of probably like 250 to 300 stories over 12 years.
Yeah. So anyway, that was one of my big stories. And then, you know, the Van Jones nothing burger, and the Google story where I got Jen Janai, who is a Google Google executive, talking about telling me over dinner how they've got they're using algorithmic means to affect the 2020 election, and that was a big story. Donald Trump forced the media to report on it, and it was brought. You know, Ted Cruz read the transcript of my dinner with Jen Janai to the faces of Google executives on the Senate floor. That was a big story. So those were I did a whole number of stories, and I trained. I became the chief investigative reporter. I was leading the journalist team, but I would say those were my three biggest hits. Although James and I both to the very end thought that Earth Supply and Renewal was
that was my favorite one. Always when I lectured all hands, I'd always bring that one up. That one was, in terms of the performance artistry of exposing something using humor, that was far and away, especially in the early years of PV. And I was there from, almost the beginning. It was 2 years, maybe it existed for a year and a half before I got fully involved. That was far and away my favorite. That one predated me, but that was far and away my favorite.
It did not nearly create as a biggest. I appreciate that, Matt. It did not create nearly the same splash that the others, but it's still in a way in my personal favorite because of the way it was packaged.
The scripting of it, the digging holes and filling them back in. There was something poetic about the way it exposed. This was about the ARRA, the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, which was the Obama stimulus. And that was what I think it was Gary Johnson who said when he was running for president that his dog created more shovel-ready jobs. Because the whole thing was we're creating all these shovel-ready jobs. He's like, my dog created more shovel-ready jobs than this, billions of dollars, tens of billions, trillions. I think it was $500 or $700 billion stimulus, and it was all just grifted. And we had the unions on tape saying how they were just taking big chunks of money by pretending to do things. And so James went in and was like, well, we've got Earth Supply and Renewal. We dig holes and we fill them back in. Give us their stimulus check. Yeah. And so it was a very strong work, but there was a lot of people also covering the boondoggle that was the stimulus, though I think we did it the most artfully with the scripting of that story.
That was that was the most brilliant, I think, fusion of art, art and journalism.
And economics. It's basically Keynesianism at work.
Yeah. And it's, it's obviously self-deprecating when James O'Keefe does the whole and his delivery is perfect. It's just perfect. So
he's a good performer. Yeah. Look at February 20th.
Yeah, and Spencer Meads and I did that together. We went undercover with the AFL-CIO, and we claimed that we dig holes and we fill them back up.
Again. Our backfilling specialists.
Unionize our workforce in exchange for access to your political Rolodex. And they're like, oh yeah, sure. Well, we'll get Kirsten Gillibrand to sign off on it. Chuck Schumer, if we write the bill, they'll sign it, and we'll be like, great, we can get money to. And you guys realize all we do is dig holes and fill them back up with the same dirt. They're like, yeah, you dig a hole, you put the dirt back in.
And the end of it is, you remember the tagline? And James delivered it beautifully because, again, he's a great actor. Look, he's defrauded the entire world with his acting skills. It's about jobs. That was the end of the very fade to black, but it's about jobs. So it was actually quite brilliant. I mean, it was really one of my favorite. It was very poetic.
Yeah.
This is great. This is
so you guys, Daniel and Brentley, you guys are talking to the
you guys are seeing the chat where I'm posting these links, right?
What's that?
No, I'm gonna post all of these in the video description so folks can look at them and reference them as they come up if they haven't seen them. Because I'm watching them in the background on mute while you guys are talking about them.
While we're talking, that was cool what you did earlier. While you were playing it while we were talking.
Play it quietly or silently.
Is that
it can be appendicized. So just for a sort of general context about the three of us, why I think we have a unique perspective individually and holistically. You've got the longest serving employee in journalists who mentored the journalists, who was James's closest partner in journalism from the beginning. You've got, one of his best friends who was working very closely with him. And, I get attacked all the time, that I obviously stole all the money. I work for Project Veritas with half my capacity, and all I do is work on a million different things. And I worked my ass off on PV from 2013, 14 on, and especially in the last 5-6 years, because as it grew, it needed it. I got paid the princely sum of $0 in 10 years. And half my capacity was deployed, especially in the last couple of years, into really fielding calls from everybody, working with the board, trying to maintain compliance, especially as things went off the rails. And, I certainly had the relationships with the employees, which James hated. He always said, you should never talk to any of the employees. I said, but the whole point is there needs to be a check on you, because if they have they have a problem with me, they come to me. But you literally steamroll everybody, James. You basically, if they even look at you wrong and you're in a bad mood, you threaten to fire them, which is horrible management, horrible people.
Well, this goes back to the crux of the issue here too, and how what played out last year played out in the way it did. And, for those who haven't seen our last episode, again, I recommend you go watch that, because
if you have 3.5 hours.
You have 3.5 hours, but it definitely will give you all the details for the most part.
Certainly of the, the moment of breakdown and then the fraudulence of the narrative setting that occurred in the following 2 weeks. But in addition to Christian and myself, Dan was, and I worked with every single executive director from Dan Francisco, the first one, to when I joined the board, 9 to 10 others over 9 years. Dan was far and away the best manager, people person, balancer, understanding how to juggle the plates, the triage of what's important, even managing James and his sort of Aspergery manias. He had the trust and the faith and the credibility instilled in him by every member of the staff, minus a couple of absolute retards like R.C. Maxwell. Fuck that guy. More into that later. I mean,
he so back when all of this started to come out and I actually started to post some things and tweet, hey, there's more to this, and just liking certain critical tweets of people who are criticizing James, RC Maxwell slipped into my DMs. Well, we had been following each other. I met him once outside the Pfizer headquarters when they were doing the truck. Met him once. We were following each other, and apparently he did like what you call a soft block. And that's when you like block someone so you unfollow each other. So he did that, then refollowed or unblocked me and then sent me a DM saying, I see what tweets you're out here liking, bitch. That's
No,
quote, verbatim. I see what tweets you're out here liking, bitch. And I didn't even know what to say to that.
Yeah.
I thought it was unusual and funny that this person who claims to be against the woke was actually behaving just like the woke.
Oh, no, he's
that's what they do. They look at who you associate with. They look at what tweets you like. They look at that sort of thing. I didn't respond. All I did was give him a thumbs up.
Yeah,
and
nice.
that was it, and just ignored it.
Super patronizing, which is an excellent move. I like.
And then he blocked me after that. But I don't know the guy. If he's welcome to come on here, he wants to give his side of things.
The irony is we hear he hates James again, but he still likes and shares all the tweet because it's about his brand and that cloud chasing. He's the ultimate Venn diagram. I'm borrowing this from somebody else who coined it. She worked at OMG. She said R.C. Maxwell is the ultimate Venn diagram of laziness, incompetence, and stupidity. And so that resonates. Anyone who knows him goes, yeah, fucking A. That is spot the fuck up.
Well, I don't know him, so I won't comment on him directly, but I will recount that was my interaction.
Oh yeah, he's a little bitch.
For just liking some tweets.
So Dan had the sort of trust and faith. He was far and away. I have about 15,000 or 20,000 people in my phone. I've done all sorts of work in private enterprise, in organizing, politics, and media and journalism. I've never seen a better manager than Dan. And Dan became, James's enemy by just saying, no, James, you can't fly private planes to go to your boat or go to LA to bang a girlfriend and claim it's for donor meetings or whatever else, whatever other shit that whistleblowers came to us with and said, you have to check this behavior. It's out of control. And, that's probably a segue into all of that.
I appreciate all that, Matt. To put some context around that, I had not really understood the level of overspending that was happening at the organization. Until I've really joined, right? There were some questions during my interview process, like, what would you do if your CEO? What would you do if your CEO tried to charter a private jet? What would you do if he, literally screamed?
Who asked you that, Dan? Who asked you that?
I don't recall. I think the longest running board member.
That's right.
And legal counsel.
Yeah, I mean, this was not new.
Yeah. So, but the extent to this wasn't apparent to me until I really got into the organization, and when I started, my intent was not to change too much. The machine was working. They were raising great sums of donations, had a great track record as far as stories going. I just need to put a little bit more sort of, workflow and controls into the process. So as I got to understand the process, within the first, I think, 10 days of me being there, I caught wind that Tom and James was pissed at Tom because Tom wouldn't let him take a helicopter to the Hamptons to some donor meeting.
For those listening who might not know, specify who Tom is.
Oh, I'm sorry. Tom was our CFO, our Chief Financial Officer. And so they had been arguing. What's that?
Who does he report by law and statute and bylaw? Who does he report to in a nonprofit?
to the board.
Correct.
Officers report to the board.
Yeah,
the officers report to the CEO, and the CEO reports to the board.
Yeah.
But we have
especially when you have a CEO who is chairman of the board, you
Right.
have to have a check and a balance by default in most states where nonprofits have charter ability. And so a signatory authority officer who has signatory authority over the bank accounts, who signs his name on the tax forms, doesn't report to one man. You report to a corpus by design.
Mm-hmm.
And that's in a nonprofit, it's the board.
And I think it's also very important to understand that, that first 7-10 days I heard about this happening. James did take the helicopter, despite Tom telling him no. And then the wire had to go. He was on the helicopter. He was there waiting for it. The wire better transfer, otherwise, we have a bigger problem. So he wound up, transferring that money. This is again before I got there. But within 3 weeks after that, we were arguing literally, and I'm in the meeting now this time. And I kind of raised my hand like, hey, I know I'm the new guy, but optically chartering a private jet is not okay. Like, did anybody watch the NRA with the Wayne LaPierre? Like, has anybody talked about that? And James was very upset with me that I would bring it up. I think he thought that I was going to be his backup and I would be able to, counter Tom.
I need you on my side, Dan. I need you on my side.
Well, yeah, and to be truthful, there were times, or transparent, there were times where I did agree with James and I disagreed with Tom on a handful of things. It certainly wasn't about private jets, but it was for other sort of spending that I could justify. And while I wasn't exactly thrilled with things like the Project Veritas experience, which happened, was scheduled before I joined, or some of the other past sort of even retractos to a certain extent. I remember telling Matt during the interview process, I'm like, can we kind of get rid of this retracto thing? It's kind of silly. And he said, there's like 320 of them, Dan. I don't think it's going away, and actually, in hindsight, I actually kind of like retracto.
Incredibly valuable.
I love retracto. I will defend retracto to this day.
Brent and I also really enjoyed the retracto.
They're done well.
At the time, I thought it was corny before I joined, and when I really got to understand the humor, and they were fun to make, and again, my time there, we had fun, and it was exciting. And it was not too dissimilar from a trading desk in the sense that you have this news information, this information flow, this energy. It's different than a trading desk today because now it's just machines. But back then you would be yelling and screaming. And the same thing was happening after the story. We're up till 2, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning and, releasing stories and getting feedback and engaging with social media and our fans. So it was really wild. So I really enjoyed it. But James and I every now and again would have these, very tough battles. They were always over people management or finances.
Remember when you called me when I was in Edinburgh, Scotland? It was 2 years ago right now. It was June 2022. I was in Edinburgh, Scotland. And not only you called me, Asha also called me, his personal assistant, who was always on his side. And Tom called me and they were like, dude, you need to get James to he's about to charter a private jet from Northern California to Tahoe for a donor meeting. And I got James on the phone and I said, James, there are viable commercial alternatives. Why are you going to charter a jet for $15,000 when he goes, well, but there's nothing that'll get me out right now. Well, okay. So you go tomorrow morning.
Yeah.
Right.
The risk to the organization of this frivolous expense in the worst optic ever. And by the way, any nonprofit has to comply with these basic level fiduciary duties. The fiduciary you are fiduciary to is the taxpayer, is the state, the federal government, the state government in which you're chartered or which you're domiciled with us at Virginia and New York. New York trying to put us out of business over everything. The Fed's trying to put us out of business over everything and taking on these undue risks because it gratifies your ego and because in your mind you can. This was so problematic, and people were, coming to us regularly. But even when I remember when I was in Edinburgh, and I talked to James, and I had to frame it like it was his idea to wait till tomorrow morning to not drop $15,000 on a private jet to save, a few hours to meet with a major investor, tech mogul who might give us a check for fucking $25,000. But hey, we just spent 15 on the thing. So ego gratification.
So this is around when, Dan, you first started, and basically what you're saying is around when you first came in, there was already this tension going on between James and Tom O'Hara.
Tom.
For those, again, who aren't aware, it was the firing of Tom O'Hara by James O'Keefe last year that resulted in that first board of directors meeting in which he was, grilled, right?
There was some stuff that happened right before then that catalyzed it, that catalyzed James being further pushed off the deep end to where he thought it was okay to not only fire Tom and then to lie about another board member, John Garvey's participation in said firing. So there was sort of like it was watching, by the way, and I found out now that he was addicted to benzos at the same time. So not only was he a narcissistic sociopath driven by his own ego, self-love, and the need for adulation, but he was also totally drug addicted. Between Viagra, I know that he had been doing steroids. Now you throw benzos into the mix, which I had no idea on until that one anonymous Twitter account unleashed all of his Telegram messages with his girlfriend, and it's like, I need to up my dosage on Xanax. Well, benzo addiction is much like fentanyl and pain opioid addiction. It fries your fucking brain up so bad. I mean, I've seen it a lot.
So do you think that could have been impacting some of his decision making?
Oh, absolutely.
At this time?
Absolutely. But I mean, everything was pointing to a person who's already out of control because of narcissistic ego, has no capacity for empathy, has no real view of right and wrong, the ends justify the means, exactly what he publicly purports to be fighting against with the left. And then you throw drugs into the mix. You throw in, his girlfriend, who we call Yoko Ono, who made things much worse, like reality star, all
Alex Rose, is that her name?
Yeah.
Alexandra Rose.
Yeah, no, I mean, a dumpster fire of a reality TV star career, like selling real estate to horny old men in OC, Newport Beach.
Not familiar with her, honestly. I have seen her on Twitter, though, and I saw a couple of her.
Oh, yeah. I
think she's on a Netflix.
Yeah, selling the OC, which is a bunch of trashy whores selling the OC. So...
it was interesting. Some of the things
we're gonna get a lot of shit just for having you on.
Dude, they've already hired a private detective to prove that I actually work for Pfizer, back into their lies.
So I wanted to address that stuff here too for those listening. And this is the thing that people got to realize is like out of everyone, I would say, who worked there after all this happened, I would say, Matt, you probably received the most public backlash from people of being blamed for it. I saw people. I think so. I saw people like saying you organized the coup. You were paid off by Pfizer. You were.
Don't forget that he's Jewish.
Oh yeah, the Jew coup.
Yeah, you were jealous of his success. You were trying to transform Project Veritas into a propaganda arm for the Ron DeSantis campaign. I saw that. That's a
Looney Loomer special, and anything the aliens beam into Laura Loomer's head becomes by virtue of it's in her head.
Well,
true. So
I knew that was absurd from the beginning because I was already kind of familiar with some of the people working there just through talking with Callan and stuff, and I followed some of them on Twitter. But I saw people like Eric Spracklin, for example, were very against James and were on you guys' side, super big Trump supporter. Like this theory didn't make sense to me that somehow PV became some DeSantis arm. I'm like, that doesn't make any sense.
James saw, because he had always issued, this was actually very, very intelligent. We gave early on in earlier years, we gave every operative, every employee rules for radicals. We obviously have the philosophy of the left and the right. We understand that. The tactics of the left have been very, very successful with, subpar philosophy of collectivism that doesn't really fly with the spirit and the zeitgeist of America and Americans. They somehow managed to make incredible inroads. And the tactics that Rules for Radicals outlined, and the most famous one being Alinsky Rule number 5, which is find the target, freeze the target, polarize the target, and essentially flog the target. You need to, stories... The idea of putting a personification behind everything makes it easy to get a mob ginned up. And that's what James did. I was the second face of PV because I'd been there the longest. I had my own media career in the conservative movement. I did, I covered international stuff, for all over the world, Poland, Hungary, Sweden. Brazil, Argentina, Belgium, France, Italy. I've been all over the world covering stuff, doing stuff for Bannon and War Room. I'd written for Breitbart starting in 2013 or 14 through the Brexit years in 17. So I'd been like very engaged in my own journalism career. It was visible, and I did media for PV. I mean, I emceed the events. People knew me as another face of PV. So it was very convenient for James to say, no, it's this guy. You know, I was on the board, and I did have a role to play because I'm the one who had a relation out of all the board members. I had a relationship with the staff. I was at the all hands. I was working on the journalism. I had my own journalism sources, my own ability to get things published, my own relationships on the Hill to get, legislative, oversight of things that we were exposed to. I was deeply, deeply involved in the inner workings of everything, and especially personnel. And the reason is because, unlike James, I love these people. I care about them. We're still a family. We're still on chats that we all talk every day 100 times. And he always looked at these people as vestigial tools, like the screwdriver on his boat, that he could plug in, plug out for whatever he needed. And if they stopped being useful, they stopped having utility in his mind, cast them aside because they're garbage and trash. And I always, push back on that because people are people. And I always explain to them, we're in the people business. Our output is a knowledge-based output. It comes from artistic creatives, journalists, producers working together to create something. Only through a team dynamic can it even exist. Yeah. And he viewed it as cult of personality. He was at the top. Everybody else existed to work to effectuate whatever vision he had, which is why he was such a horrible manager and boss, because every moment that would change, he would pivot and in and out, helicopter in, micromanage, tell people you're doing it wrong. Not that, I mean, he called me all the time and told me, I'm the only person there who does any work. Everybody there is useless. I had this conversation with him all the time. I'm like, no, that's not true, James. If you fired all of them, you wouldn't even know how to get into the social media accounts, let alone how to spell correctly to publish anything. I mean, his self-view was so warped. He was a god, and everybody existed to serve at the feet of, so far below him, Mount Olympus, and, speak upward and throw whatever output they have at him so that he can plug it in and mastermind it. And you know what? Everybody started to see it at PV in the last year. And what happened was we actually had a downtick in top line revenues. And so he got much worse. He got much more abusive. He got much more, the way he used people was much more abrasive. He didn't, when he says, okay, I'm not a touchy-feely boss, I may not say happy Thanksgiving. Oh, please. He didn't give a fuck if your mother died. He goes, why are you not at work? Oh, my mother died. Oh, well, what does that have to do with me? I mean, he doesn't give a shit about people at all. They are purely tools to effectuate the furtherance of adulation and rose petals thrown at his feet.
Well, my analogy of how I was perceiving what happened was definitely not as extreme as that, but I saw it as like a parent who refused to allow their child to grow up and become their own person. So, like, look at Project Veritas as this child. He gives birth to it. He founds it. As the child grows, and any parent, I'm not a parent, but I'm sure any parent can attest to this, you want your child to slowly become more independent and to become their own person. That's the point of parenting, is you're supposed to be forming a person who can operate on their own eventually, and then they distance from you. They separate, they become their own being. Project Veritas grew into its own thing. It was no longer just about him. There are all these other people involved now with all these other skills and talents who make the machine operate. It is no longer about you. You have to let go of it and let the child grow and be its own person. He wanted to hold on to it and to control that. And, again, any parent can probably tell you that typically does not work when you try to do that.
The duplicity of, talking both sides of his mouth. For the last 5 years, he was saying, I need good managers. I need people who can disintermediate me from doing the things that, that are my highest, best use of my time, was as he would always say. And so we found managers, and many good ones. The last three sort of executives and COOs, chiefs of staff, executive directors, like Dan, they were all very, very good. And he destroyed each of them, undermined each of them. Dan was far and away the best because he had the soft skills and the hard skills. He was good at, delivering things that are, firm and tangible, but he's also good at managing people and personalities, and even as far as it went, as far as it's possible, managing James to some degree, until even he, regularly had to, call the board and say, no, this is a little bit out of control. We need to do something here. And, these are all people who had like relevant corporate, professional. These were not like, schlubs off the street who, were panhandling one day and now, your chief of staff. These were people who had managed people before, who had managed P&Ls, manage logistics, like serious people. And even our board members, serious people. And James did everything he could to divide and conquer and tell them, I need good managers, and then hurt those managers that were put in every which way to stop them from managing and doing the disintermediation that he demanded we find people to do for him. So it was, your assessment is exactly right. We see this in startups. I have a venture fund. I work with a lot, and I do very early stage, angel seed. And like you see this when you start to get revenues, and now you have to expand your sales, your logistics, and really do more advanced funding rounds. You now need more people at the table making decisions. It cannot come down to one, because one person cannot know everything when you have this many moving parts. Mm-hmm. And so this is not an uncommon thing with those who create a vision and then execute it, and then it actually succeeds, which is what happened at PV. And you're right, he absolutely wouldn't let it go. And the rubber met the road when is it a cult of personality, or is it a journalism unit that's going to go out and spread forth more journalism than even before?
Can't be both.
You handle that. It can't be both. And that's why he tried to inject as much show tunes as he could, because that would keep it under control in the cult of personality. A little bit of journalism, a little bit of show tunes that I star in.
Well, on the cult of personality note thing, I think that also gets back to the crux of the matter. I mentioned earlier the crux was there was no environment in which employees felt they could approach him and criticize him, like you said earlier. And that was why that board meeting even happened and all of that as a result of the firing.
He was running off the hook for the last year.
Yeah. And it was why, it was why a lot of the workers felt they had to share their testimony at that time and express their grievances, because they didn't think they could go directly with him. But what this really comes down to is he had the problem with yes men. Callan said the same thing too. And I wanted to throw the ball to Christian here, because I remember Callan mentioning that when you and James first met and you were all kind of in Breitbart's circle and stuff, that Breitbart sort of, asked you to keep an eye on James. And there was already this kind of a perception that he might need to be reeled in a bit because he could go off the rails. So talk a bit about that. And like, when did you, Christian, start to maybe notice something was up with James, or that he might need a friend to try to like correct his course a bit? Because of course you didn't end up joining him. You did stay at Project Veritas. And I thought that was one of the most telling things, and what really made me look at the story differently, because I asked myself, well, why is this guy who's known this, James so long, not go take his side and leave PV and join him? So when did you start to notice that something was up, and why did you decide to stay?
Yeah, well, I mean, Andrew, I sometimes was kind of there was a falling out between Andrew and James in the months leading up to, I'd say like 6 months leading up to Andrew's death, where
James never says that. He says they were bosom buddies to the end.
Yeah, well, I mean, Andrew was felt very pushed away by James, is what he expressed to me. I mean, Andrew would call me in the middle of, wait, no, not in the middle of the night. I don't know why I started that with in the middle, but he would call me. Oh yeah, that's why I was saying in the middle. He would kind of put me in the middle between him and James sometimes. He would call me and say, Christian, you're the only person in that James listens to who's not a yes man. I need you to get through to him for me, because he's not listening to me. So oftentimes I kind of played that role, and there was a falling out between them, and towards the end, and Andrew warned me this kind of thing could happen. James, he surrounds himself with yes men. And to James's credit, the very first time James and I had gotten to a fight was in November of 2011, and it was over a story that Andrew had actually sent me to Columbus, Ohio, where I was covering the SB 5 issue 2 election. And this is really wonky stuff for that. No, you guys won't remember, but but it was when John Kasich was a beloved, he was one of the beloved governors, along with Chris Christie and Mike Pence and, the union busting governors. Anyway, and I did a series of stories for Andrew for 2 months. I was embedded in Columbus for 2 months doing so. And one of my stories was I teamed up with James. It was sort of like a co-production. and James wanted to make the story about Sam Stein and how he like gets his allegedly. James heard a rumor somewhere that Sam Stein at the Huffington Post gets his sources drunk, which whatever. And he called him and said, "Is this true?" And recorded the phone call, and Sam Stein was like, "No, that's not true." But he published it anyway. And I wanted to
pose with the Kyle Seraphin video.
It's very interesting, isn't it? Yeah, because that was like
it almost seems like he's a fraud. Who knew?
Well, it was just very interesting because like James wanted to make it all about this complete. I mean, I was there to cover the union issues, and it was actually a very good story. And James was very instrumental in the parts of the story that were, I think I called the Economic Policy Institute. Yeah, that's what I did. I called the Economic Policy Institute, asked them, pretended to be working on behalf of the union, said, will you find out? Will you do some homework for us? And if the data makes validates the Kasich side, then will you kill the story? Will you kill the study? And they said yes. And then I confronted the guy Chris Hansen style. And it was a very good story. But then James kind of took it in this weird direction where he also wanted to have a whole subplot about Sam Stein getting his sources drunk. Anyway, and James and I got into a big fight about this. And to his credit, and James ended up publishing it the way that he wanted to publish it. But then a month later, he sent me a handwritten Christmas card apologizing, and if he felt very badly about it. And so there were multiple times that whenever I was like the no man, not the non-yes man, whenever I kind of was the I told James it's not a good idea, we shouldn't do this.
Challenge him on something.
Yeah, I would challenge him. And to his credit, even though he would still, go forward with his way, I would always be I would oftentimes be proven right, and then he would turn and say you were right. So
that was very different than in later years.
In the early years.
Yeah, in later years, it was I will take and I heard this from employees all the time. He literally will shit on my idea, then 20 minutes later take it and be like, "Ooh, eureka, I got a fucking brilliant one." And people would hear their ideas read back to them. And then people would look at each other and be like, "He's out of fucking control." I mean, I remember the last argument I had with him was last time we spoke on the phone a few days. It was actually it was the Wednesday before the Thursday when he fired Tom and Barry. He said, "I'm fucking sick of Barry. I'm sick of Tom. I want to fire him." Like, you can't fire them. I said, Barry.
To be clear, he could fire Barry.
Yeah, and I said,
so he was already expressing thinking about that, and you had already forewarned him
to be transparent. And James and I had both been very concerned with Barry because we hired him for something very specific. Mm-hmm. We gave him a broader title because we wanted to grow into that. But there were some very specific things that he was going to be helping me in particular with. And I like Barry, by the way. And I think through this whole thing, he meant well. But he wanted to be more involved than we necessarily needed, and we weren't looking for another C-suite member. He got the role of chief strategy officer, but it was really to talk about this platform that we wanted to roll out, a bigger platform. So James and I were expressing mutual frustration with Barry. But James took it to, the next level.
And he also was using Barry. He was looking at Barry as a cash register, like, correct, just go raise me money. And again, this sort of round peg, square hole syndrome that I sort of labeled over the years, where he was like, I'm going to take this guy. I think he can do this for me. Doesn't matter if he is buy-in or not. I'm just going to make him do it. And, and there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. And this last call we had, the Wednesday before the Groundhog's Day massacre, the Thursday where he fired them and just unilaterally started, taking scalps internally. And especially with Tom, there's no right to do. And he lied about it, which was such a breach. But, we had an argument over whether it was better to be loved or feared. And I said, your employees just don't really like you anymore. And they're all afraid of you. And he said, good, they should be. Then they'll finally get to work. Meanwhile, as people work their ass off all day, every day. And I said to him, they work their ass off for you. You're the one who gets credit. You're the one who gets rose petals thrown at your feet. And he said, well, I just want them to do what I say. And I said, but you've got creative people. That's why their output is so good. You can't just make people your slaves. And he goes, well, I pay their paychecks. Yes, I can. And I don't care. I'd rather have them scared of me than like me. I don't want them to like me. And I was like, well, no wonder the culture is so toxic. And I remember I'd walked into the office for the first time in several months, like a month or two earlier. And I had my own key fob. I just would walk in when I was in New York. I would just go into the office, and I walked in, and I remember this was like, this was during the Pfizer stuff. It was in January because I was there for, the January stuff. So it was like a month before. I walked into that office and I could just feel the palpable, before talking to anybody or seeing anyone, I could feel the fucking air. It was cold and dark and nasty, and it felt really bad. And then I started making eye contact with people as I turned a corner and saw their desks, and they all looked like pleading in their eyes, save us. Like, this is miserable. We hate our lives. That's the way it became. And that was a fish rots from the head. That was the culture that he made while he was chasing dollars, adulation, show tunes, and whatever else that was going to feed his ego at the expense of having a healthy, productive culture. And, there was a reason we had a downtick in top line revenue year over year for the first time in 9 years. And it was related to him. And the more that happened, it was like a Chinese finger puzzle, where it's like the harder you pull, the tighter it gets. He would just drill on people even more, which would make the culture even worse, which would make his behavior with donors and those externally even more offensive. Later and later to more meetings, more dismissive, telling people anything they do in life is worthless. He's the only one who does anything of value. He told that to donors. They told me after. They're like, no, we didn't want to fund this anymore. The dude was out of control. It's like he was telling me that everything I've ever donated money to is worthless except what he does. And then I see he's doing fucking show tunes with my dollars. So, I mean, the place was out of control. I mean, this stuff, I know I don't know what we're targeting on time. We can't all be Cal and Erickson.
Yeah, no, we're at about an hour and a half right now.
I figured we'd be at like 3 because there's so much.
Well, we'll try to cut it at around 2. But yeah, there is a lot, and although we did cover a lot in our last episode, there's 3 of you, so it's we'll see. I think 2 hours is probably good.
Real quick, just a tiny little digression. I want to ask: do you guys think they killed Andrew Breitbart?
No, 0 shot.
I don't know too much about his death. So
he was frenetic as hell. He drank a bottle of red wine and a steak every night, and then rage tweeted till 4 a.m. And Christian, you were there watching it.
Well, I don't know that I saw that. I do remember the last day that he was alive, he came into the office about 2 p.m. And he was full of energy. He had just gotten back from the gym. He had just had an operation on his finger. There, he had like a little cancerous thing on his finger that he'd gotten removed anyway. He was full. He was, and so what was happening that day? There was a lot of things happening that day. So this was the final day of January. No, this is the final day of February 28th, 2012, and James O'Keefe was preparing to file suit against David Schuster, Keith Olbermann, and Al Gore because of coverage on current TV that was defaming James O'Keefe. And so I was going to write a story. A lot of what I did at Breitbart News was in conjunction with James O'Keefe. So I was going to write a story on that. And then the next, and he was gonna. I think James was gonna file suit the next day, and I was prepping to write an article about it. And Andrew goes upstairs. This was the Westwood office, which had 2 stories, and upstairs there was Andrew. Andrew's desk was right in the corner, and then there was me. There was Chuck Johnson. There was Ben Shapiro. Larry. It was like a really small. And it was Dana Lash and Larry O'Connor, Meredith Dake. Anyway, so Andrew goes upstairs and he's like, Christian, get up here. And so I go upstairs, and I assumed he wanted to talk about the article that I was going to write. And he sits down at his desk. He's turning on his computer, opening his Diet Coke. And he's like, and I'm like, I assume you want to talk about this article about James and the lawsuit. So I'm thinking of approaching it from this angle. He's like, no. What do you think of this tweet? And I'm like, what is this? So I look at the tweet, and it's like he has all these haters, and it was some hater, some random ass person had like talked smack to him. So he had this tweet, this retort tweet like lined up. He's like, what do you think of this tweet? And I'm like, oh, it's very funny. He's like, what, you don't like it? And I'm like, no, it's very funny. He's like, okay, great, tweet. And then he just, continues tweet storming. And I'm like, okay, well, maybe we could talk about this later. Andrew was obsessed with his Twitter. People don't realize that Donald Trump, like before, like Andrew, you know how in the movie The Doors, the dying Indian, his spirit gets transferred into Jim Morrison, and Jim Morrison believes that he was sort of like the reincarnation of this dying Indian he saw on the side of the road. That kind of to me is like in Donald Trump, and Andrew Breitbart. Andrew Breitbart was the original, like, the original.
Shitlord is the word you're looking for.
Pardon?
Shitlord.
Yeah, I guess I don't know that term, but he was like the original, like, hyphy, in your, like, retweeting, like tweeting back to everyone who talks smack, the mean, he was the originator of the mean tweets that Donald Trump is known for. Anyway, so Andrew Breitbart was tweeting, tweeting into the night at all these anonymous people. I remember it was anonymous. And the next day after he had died, of course, we had a small gathering at Barney's Beanery in Westwood. And this one guy who was like, I forgot who he was, but he was like a hacking expert or something. And he was there and he's like, dude, Andrew called me at like 1 a.m. and he was like freaked out because he felt like he had pissed off these anonymous people. I don't know if you guys remember Anonymous, but
yeah, of course.
Yeah,
and there's these anonymous people, and Andrew called me in the middle of the night, and he was like, "I'm legitimately worried about these people, about having, So I don't know. I don't know what any of that's all about."
Dude,
but
he had such indications for a heart attack, and he had a heart attack.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm just recalling what I recall from that day.
No, I was asking for context because you guys have more direct experience than I did. So
yeah.
I was just curious.
I mean, there were rumors about, like, the guy who witnessed him collapse was an Army medic, and he said he was not the right color that you're supposed to be when you have a heart attack.
Didn't he have a heart attack overnight?
I don't know. I don't know. And then there was something about
the news that he
hired, and then the PI. Pardon?
I thought we'd woken up to the news that he'd passed overnight, if memory recalls.
Well, no, it was like I think he collapsed on his way home. He had been at the Westwood, the Brentwood, which was a bar in Brentwood called the Brentwood, and he was walking home and he apparently collapsed. And then there was a guy who witnessed his collapse, who was an Army medic, supposedly, and then they couldn't track that guy down. I heard all kinds of weird rumors, and the chief coroner died.
March 1st, 2012, near his home, was pronounced dead at UCLA.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I mean, none of that stuff was ever corroborated. I do know that.
Sorry, I didn't mean to sidetrack us. We can get back to talk. We should talk about. I actually wanted to get your guys' reaction to some of these Alexandra Rose, James O'Keefe text messages that were published by this anonymous account, James O'Keefe, the panty thief.
Yeah, which none of us, and we've all been trying to figure out who that is. None of us know who it is, but that person or people have a hell of a trove, because I've messaged with them and they're like reading me back my messages and like sending me stuff. Like when James and I got this argument the night before he fired Tom, they're asking me questions on context. And, my favorite one that I published is the one where him and his girlfriend, he's flexing. He's like, I'm going to punch Matthew Tyrmand in the face when I see him in public. And I saw him in public in March to get punched in the face.
Yeah. So
you saw him in public in March? What happened? March of this past year?
Yeah. At an event.
Oh, yeah. Oh, that's right. That's right. You told us about that.
Gave him a head nod and he just avoided me.
Yes,
I think, like, for me, a lot of the sort of details I'm not so interested in. I think, but it does go to show some of the personality and mentality and thought process that he had that was very different than what was on camera.
Oh yeah.
And I remember the last question I asked James before I was hired, during the interview process. I think the next day he sent me a job offer, but I was at the office. I was in his office. It was myself, him, and actually I believe Paul Cali was in the office with us, who was our counsel at the time, external counsel. James said, "Do you have any other questions for me?" And I said, "Yeah. Today, you leave the office, you walk outside, you get hit by a bus. As you're floating, hopefully upwards, looking down at Project Veritas HQ, what do you see? Is it still there?" And he said, "Right now, no, but that's why I want to hire people like you, because that's what I want." And so going through the sort of machinations of that, all of a sudden realizing that, and I don't think he was actually lying to me. I don't think in his head he's thinking, I'm not really being sincere saying this to do this answer to Dan. I think he thought that he convinced himself that that's what he wanted to do, but in practice he can never actually make it happen. And I remember probably the biggest argument before the real blow up happened, where we had a legitimate screaming match at each other. The biggest argument we ever had was it was very clear our Mamaroneck office was not conducive to work for a variety of reasons. It was too small. It was not set up right. There was no privacy. It was very, very difficult to get things done. No dedicated studio. Very, very difficult to get things done there. And so we were looking for a new headquarters. A couple of our team went out, did a lot of work gathering, potential options that would fit our requirements. We went around and saw them all. James and I went together to see them all. And there was one that made perfect sense for us. James was excited about it. I was excited about it. We were excited to tell the team about it. And then we went to the last one, which was on the water, big, beautiful glass building, 2.5x whatever this other place cost. And he fell in love with it and refused to even consider the old one again. And I said, "James, this is it's really this is not in our budget. This is not what we can do. And by the way, the other place fits our aesthetics so much more. It just feels like home. This place feels like a hedge fund is going to be coming back on the door, knocking on the door and saying, 'Hey, I want my space back.'" And we got into a huge argument. He was in Vegas. I did not go to Vegas because I didn't even think anybody should be going to Vegas. But there was some event out there. He was speaking a number of speeches. And during that trip, so we're arguing about the rent. He goes to Vegas. I make the mistake of not going. He has a number of speeches, and he was really burning the candle at both ends. And I meant what I said in some of these press releases that we put out. That he's the hardest working man I have ever met, and he really, whether he's productive with his time or not, or uses his time as wisely as possible, probably not. But the guy is he lived and breathed PV. That was his life.
Yeah, Callan said as much as well. He said,
yeah, that was his thing. So I got a phone call from one of our colleagues who was out in Vegas with them, and they said, "No one will say no to James, but he's asking us to go and get him 8 bottles of this super expensive tequila to parade into our after party." Now, 2 problems with that: the after party was paid by PV, and we had an alcohol minimum we had to spend at the place, and there was no external alcohol allowed. So I said, "Don't go." The person who he's asking said, "I don't know what to do." I said, "Just don't go. I'll take care of it."
Why did he want that alcohol, by the way, Dan?
He was showing off to his girlfriend, supposedly.
Was it her favorite?
So it was his girlfriend. That's what they said. It was his girlfriend's favorite tequila. So I text him and said, "Hey, just to let you know, I shut down the tequila." He didn't respond to me. Comes back from Vegas. As soon as he's on the plane, as soon as he lands, he can get on the phone. He calls me, and he lays into me about the tequila thing a little bit. I was going to pay for it. I said, "James, that's not the point. The whole point was that you're sending our staff to go do it. Number one. Number two, again, No outside booze. We're paying for the party. We've got a booze minimum. Like, it just makes no sense. I'm like, I get it. Maybe you had a drink in you and you're trying to impress people. Like, whatever. I'm like, I'm not making a big thing about it. I'm not judging you, but it's just, we're not doing it. And that's why I shut it down. And he got over it. And then he said to me, we started arguing about the rent again. Then he said to me, Dan, sometimes I need you to be more of a yes man. And now during my interview process, not once, not twice, at least 3 or 4 times, I said, look, if you want a yes man, and there was no indication that I was necessarily going to be a yes man, but I knew that I was one of a dozen COOs in a dozen years. So, and I knew that the tenure of a employee there, with very few exceptions, was about 18 months. So I said, if you want a yes man, like, let's just end the conversation now, because that's not what I'm joining this for. Like, we're going to challenge each other. Like, I'm not going to stand down to you. Like, I don't look at you as some celebrity star guy. Like, you were 12 years old when I was making a lot of money on Wall Street, and I've managed way more people than you. So this is not going to, like, we can't do this, or let's just not do it. He quieted down and sort of, we let the night go over, and I started really thinking about things, and I drafted a resignation letter, an email. And we were going to Baltimore that week to visit a potential donor, or a donor, actually, not even a potential donor. And so he flew there. He was coming back from somewhere, and then I took the train down, and Asha, his executive assistant, asked, "How are you getting home? James wants to go home with you." And I said, taking the train. She's like, "You don't want to fly?" I'm like, "No, I want to take the train. It's cheaper and it's easier." So we took the train together on the way home. And when you're sitting on Amtrak together, you sort of recline back and you're kind of looking at each other side eye, like not too dissimilar, like being almost lying down next to each other. It's a vulnerable position sometimes, and it's late at night. It's 10:30 at night, 11 o'clock at night. We're exhausted. And I said, "Hey, can we talk about something that's going to be uncomfortable?" And he said, "Sure." I said, "The comment you made about the yes man the other night," I said, "I can't get it out of my head. So much so that I drafted a short resignation email. If you really want me to be a yes man, I'm going to hit the send button."
When was this?
This was, when was Vegas? This had to have been...
that was August 2022.
August. It was a summer. It was a summer.
Summer 2022. So this would have been September, probably.
Yeah.
So you were only there a few months when this happened.
Yeah, I was there. I started in April. Yeah.
Okay.
And believe me, being there just a few months, it's dog years. It's dog years. At that point, it was feeling good. Like I was starting to sort of hit my stride a little bit. I felt like I was getting a lot of the staff and many of the journalists. It's funny being in an organization like that, working with undercover journalists. They're undercover, right? Like, so like, they're not going to open up to me, especially me, because I'm the suit, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Despite not ever wearing a suit, but I spoke to Christian a lot.
Goldman Sachs.
Yeah. I spoke to Christian a lot. I spoke to a lot of our senior leaders, and I felt like I was making good headway. I felt good about our progress. So this was a disappointing thing for me to get to. Like, I didn't want this to be. And I said, "James, look, you were just coming back from Vegas when you said this. You were exhausted. You were getting off the plane. You were pissed off because there was a whole bunch of other controversies going on." I said, "So if you just fucked up and said something you didn't really mean, then that's fine. But if you meant it, like, let's just stop. Like, I'll just go home." And I could tell on the train, he literally reacted as if he got gut punched. And he started shaking his head. He put his hand in his head. He goes, "No, that's not." And he looked at me. He's like, "No, that's not. It's not what I meant. I shouldn't have said that. I was very frustrated. I was embarrassed." And that was about the tequila thing. I go, "Dude, I don't care. Like, we don't have to talk about the tequila thing. Like, let's not talk about the tequila thing, because I don't give a fuck. Like, it doesn't matter."
Mm-hmm.
So we moved on from that. Then, we really, the blow up really that happened, what Matt was talking a little bit, the night before he fired Tom. James and I were on and off the phone while that was happening, and we were on and off texting and messaging in our Teams chats. And he texted me and he said, "I just fired Tom." And I responded, "That sounds wildly irresponsible." I said, what are you going to do for a controller? And he said, I said, and mind you, what are you going to do to run payroll tomorrow? Like I don't give a shit about my paycheck, but there's a whole bunch of people who are going to need to pay rent. If they don't get the paycheck, they're not going to be able to pay the rent. I'm like, Tom is the only guy with the code to put payroll in, like literally. So, and he told me, you'll figure it out, which is true. I could figure it out, but it was just wildly irresponsible. So and then I said, James, the other thing is, and he did not want to hear this at all. I said, you literally don't have the authority to fire Tom. He's an officer. The board has to do this. We had a board meeting. I said, oh, you did? He said, John Garvey was on. As this is happening,
by the way, to have a board meeting, there has to be a clarification sent to all board members with the chairman can do 24-hour notice, any other board member 48 hours notice. A board meeting is not like you get on the call with a board member and say, okay, we're going to do this. There's a process by statute in which to effectuate and actualize an actual board meeting. You can't just
so
like willy-nilly be like, oh, I just called my guy and he did it.
At some point during that time, during this exchange, John Garvey called me, and at some point, Matt and I got on the phone.
You told me, you actually told me, he goes, because I was getting it from Josh and staff that Tom had just been fired because Josh, our IT guy, had been like instructed to turn off his access and block his, block his email, block his key fob, all this shit.
So we got John on the phone, and I said to John, John, you have to send an email right this moment saying that you did not do that and you went out on a board meeting.
We were on a call, all three of us. Yeah, because you and I were talking, and,
and then we got John on the phone.
I said, did you speak to James? He goes, no, I haven't spoke to James. The whole thing was made up. And so then,
he did speak to James, but there were two people on the line that he didn't know who they were. He was complaining about Tom.
That was after. That was attempted a board meeting later. No. He said he called John.
There
was no conversation with John because John wasn't, called, and then I called John and then looped him in with us, and then you and I both were talking to him, and John's like, this is the first I'm hearing of any of this.
Yeah, John was on the phone with him. He was complaining about Tom. But there was nothing about firing. He never agreed with it. And it certainly wasn't a board meeting. There were non-board members on the call.
That was a different call. That was when you had Steve Fettig, and that was later on when that call that with like anons that we couldn't identify, and that was when the shit already hit the fan. When that was happening.
So as this was happening. Well, the day before he fired Tom, I think it was, maybe it was the day before he fired Barry, right? He fired Barry before Tom, right?
They were same day.
Same day. So James and I were on the phone before he fired Barry, and I was at headquarters, and James is very upset. And this lasted over, I believe the conversation was in the afternoon, and then late that night when I got home, we continued it. And he really didn't understand what had gone so wrong on this call with our business development team, our Devo team. And Barry was on that call and with the rest of our team. And it was on speaker. And in headquarters, you have a speaker phone phone high enough volume. The entire headquarters, everybody there is going to hear it. So James laid into I was not on this call. James, this was a Thursday morning call, like probably 9 o'clock in the morning, Thursday morning. And James laid into Barry and the rest of the team because he wanted them to email all of these donors with this big party that Barry helped to put together. A lot of them were his friends, asking for, I believe it was either a $25,000 or $50,000 minimum donation via email. And Barry, along with the rest of the business development team, essentially said, no, like, we're not going to do it that way. It's too impersonal. Half of these people just met us. Barry was saying, half of these people are my friends. I'm not going to send them an email. Like, there's a little bit of a sales cycle here. So James essentially got super frustrated, exploded on them, said, if you don't do it, then you're all fired.
And for those listening, you can again watch the previous episode in which Callan recalls these same exact events, and he was present there when these things occurred.
And what's interesting is our communications team and our Devo team butt heads a lot. They have a lot of creative differences in how to communicate things and how to message things, and some of that stuff was productive and some of the stuff was counterproductive. But but it was notable that the comms team actually came into the Devo team to sort of be like, I'm sorry you just went through that, right? So James then calls me, explains to me what happened. And I said, James, what list of people did you want to send this to? And he tells me, it was just 6 people. I said, well, I heard that it was the entire party that you guys just had, that Barry put together. He said, no. I said, can you send me the spreadsheet that you're talking about? Sure. So he sends me the spreadsheet with 6 action items on it. He had asked Devo, the business development team, to create a weekly list, the JOK weekly to-do list. These are the things that they need James to call. Call John Smith to thank him for his $25,000 donation. Call Jane Smith to ask her for $25,000, et cetera, et cetera. Mm-hmm. So I said, James, I'm looking at your JOK weekly list. He goes, yeah. I said, these are tasks that you're supposed to do. I said, you are screaming and threatening to fire the entire Devo team, and you guys aren't even talking about having the same conversation. Well, that's not what I said. I told him this. I go, well, then why are you asking Devo to come up with a to-do list for you and then putting it back on Devo for them to do it? Oh, I might have screwed up. You think? That conversation later went into that the Barry is the problem here. He just refused to accept that he was wrong with this. That Barry's the problem here. He feels like despite even that blow up, I'll apologize for that, mea culpa, but I still have a problem with Barry, yada, yada.
Which, said, this goes back to why he broke too from the organization. And, for those who want to listen to the board meeting that resulted in that, the main thing that stuck out to me in which James made his decision when he finally decided, okay, this is it. Like, I can't work this out with them, was when they tried to temporarily suspend his hiring and firing powers and then reinstated Barry, which he disagreed with. He voted against that, and everyone obviously voted for it. So
I think one of the things that happened that was not exactly clear to me was, and again, I like Barry, and I think he could have been productive in the long term. And Barry and I had our differences, but we were very transparent with each other in a very respectful way. That hey, I don't think I don't need you to do this, and so stay in your lane, type of thing. And we were able to have that conversation, but I think the real hard part was James now having to find that scapegoat. In hindsight, putting on Barry. I remember explaining to James. I said, James, I don't think you truly understand. What's happening here with the organization. When you have a tenure of 18 months, when I'm the 11th or 12th COO in 12 years, there's something really profoundly wrong. I said the best way I can describe this, and I have described this way to a number of folks, including to the team after we tried to keep the ship afloat. The headquarters always had this sort of layer of gasoline on the floor of the place, and it was just waiting for a spark. And when I said that, James goes, yeah, and Barry was the spark. I go, no, you're the spark, and you're the gasoline. You poured it there. Yeah. I said, this is you. This is your fault.
And then on February 20th, he literally lit the match. When at the 2-week mark, when he did that video, lying his ass off about everything and blaming everybody and portraying himself as a poor, victimized little lamb at the hands of, an evil board, all his hand-picked guys who are close friends. It was me, one of his best friends, and 4 older guys who were like uncles to him, close friends, mentors, advisors. As I said, combined knowledge of knowing him like 60 years and combined board experience 40 years or something, some crazy numbers, a highly consistent and static board. There was, after I joined the board, there was never any like coming and going. It was just adding people who stayed on. Mm-hmm. And it was entirely consistent. And these were people who were donors, who hosted him, who were the biggest champions of him and PV, who were there at all hours, every day, week, month, and year, all night, as he cried on their shoulder about how his staff sucked and about how his leadership sucked and all this and the other. And then he just lit a match on everybody.
So you're saying they weren't all part of a giant conspiracy to oust James out of jealousy?
I mean, you heard the board meeting. I've never listened to the board meeting because I lived it and I know what I said. I know what other people said. And we all basically had the same consistent refrain, which was, we're just trying to fix things, dude. Like, you've caused some problems. You've crossed a Rubicon on spending stuff that's like highly illegal. You know, did illegal spending and then lied about it, which like compounds the issue. Committed outright fraud. I mean, we had a whistleblower come to us inside the organization who basically said he was guilty of conspiracy and racketeering. He was forcing the employee to write fraudulent expenses on a reimbursement form of his personal spending to then get reimbursed for using the corporate card for James' personal spending. We had an employee talk to the auditors about it, talk to us about it. It was like, and it was across state lines, so it's a federal crime. Yeah. This is not this is not gray stuff. This is fucking black and white. This is felonious behavior. I mean, this is not, Trump hush money and like, is it a business expense or not? Which, even with my issue with Trump,
this is not. Oops, I used the corporate card instead of the personal card, right?
Yeah, like which happened a lot. I mean, I remember when Tom joined, when I was interviewing Tom. I did a final interview with Tom at Grand Central Station when he was when I met him in the city, and we had just discovered this was years before you were there, Dan. But like, we discovered that he'd been paying for his girlfriend's dog food at PetMart on the corporate card. Like, we had to claw that back. There was never a reach into his pocket, to separate personal and, professional spending. It was, I'm going to use the corporate card for everything. And then the money got used to, buy a bigger boat, which I imagine will get repossessed at some point. So because this shit was out of control.
To play a little devil's advocate here, what would you say to the people who believe that these grievances that you guys are talking about and the other employees expressed at the board meeting and stuff are trivial things, that these aren't a big deal, and that you guys should have just let it go, because by not letting it go and not keeping James on board, it's your fault that the organization
first thing is they should stop listening to Tim Pool, because that dude's a fucking retard. Like when Tim Pool says donors wanted to have him have a hangar filled with Ferraris because he was so effective. No, you fucking idiot. That every nonprofit would be a money laundering operation, which is, what we were at risk of being accused of being when you use money that is donor driven in a 501c3 for personal usage. We tried to do everything to curtail for years. I talked about when I was in Edinburgh about the private planes. I was shocked when I found out that, development team was coming to me and saying, no, he was making us the day of to fly, when he was flying to LA to, hook up with his girlfriend. Oh, set me up a donor meeting. And then to make things even worse, he would stand up the donor meeting because he was at the gym. And that was, something that we'd heard from people, at the board on that board call. These testimonies can't be discounted. We had no choice but to suspend a firing, because all of a sudden, what's he going to do? And that's why we had to reinstate Barry. Barry had become a whistleblower at that point because he blew the whistle on the helicopter ride to Maine to go to his boat for his vacation on a made-up donor meeting. The donor meeting was a de minimis donor that happened previous. There was no donor meeting at that current time. And Barry all of a sudden becomes a whistleblower. And now James fired a whistleblower in New York State. New York and California are the worst states in the country to do, employee labor violations, especially firing a whistleblower. Yeah. It's like, there was no choice here. Yeah, we're grown up. We're not going to twist the law to conform to whatever abuses we believe our fearless leaders should be able to get away with as per Tim Pool, because we're fucking grown-ups and we all run businesses and we all have to follow the law. Yeah, and, I've been involved as a board member. I had to study the 501c3 code like fucking crazy for the last 10 years.
Let Christian talk, dude. Let Christian
has something.
Sorry, I'm heated. I'm wound up for like a year and a half on this.
I know.
First guys I'm talking to about it. I got to write a book.
I was just going to say what Matt said. Go on.
What Matt said. Let me tell you, you're so good looking.
What I was going to say is this. The premise of the question needs to be addressed, which is what people say, oh, so just because some employees got butthurt about things, James has to be ousted or James has to leave. Whoa. No one wanted him gone. No one wanted him gone. Correct. If you listen to the board recording, which has James retweeted that board recording once since it's been public?
He threatened me in a tweet that he would. And I said, please do.
I remember him, saying that he had it, but he never released it.
And I said, let's show receipts.
How interesting, because in his President's Day speech, he says, I encourage you all, of course, only meaning the staff that because he only meant for the staff to see that videotape. He says, I encourage you all to ask the board. There is a recording, and I encourage you all to ask for that recording so that you can listen to it. Okay, it's public. Yeah. If it was a 6-hour crucifixion that you said it was. Now, when James sent it to me, he leaked it to me. I didn't tell you, Dan, and I didn't tell you, Matt, because I gave him my word that I wouldn't tell anyone. But I had access. I had that recording all that time. I listened to
the same one that we shared when we spoke.
James, I gave that to Callan, and then Callan gave it to you guys.
Okay.
And James gave it to me, and that was actually James' recording.
That explains it, because I did eventually figure out it was James's recording just by listening to it. I'm like, oh, this is him doing it, because when he speaks, you can hear he's the closest to the mic.
Yeah. Look, no one has been more loyal to James O'Keefe, who is not blood freaking related to him, than Christian Hartsock. Okay.
Good. I'm up there. 10 years. Didn't get paid a dime. Fucking defended him every which way.
Okay. What I mean is for longer. I'm talking about for longer in terms of longevity. 2009. So there was times that he gave me every reason. I stood with James before there were hashtags. I stood with James before it was cool. Okay, when it was uncool to stand with James, I stood with James. Okay, CNN Love Boat, not a single. I went down with the ship. I was completely blindsided by that. I was in the middle. I'm the one brokered the meeting between James and Abby Boudreau, just so she could get access to the meeting.
Bro, they were your dildos.
Okay. And, New Orleans, I was there. If you looked at James's Facebook, and James remembers this, if he's hearing this, he knows exactly what I'm talking about. His Facebook.
He's going to listen to this for sure.
Well, anyway,
he's busy. He's busy solving the border crisis.
Trash him. I was the one person on his Facebook standing up for him. It was not cool. People were throwing him under the bus left and right. Brent Bazell, Michelle Malkin. They were throwing him under the bus, and it was uncool to stand with James in 2010 and 2011, and I did it, okay? It was uncool to not stand with James. I'm always doing the uncool thing, I guess. So when he says, some people just didn't have courage. Well, what do you mean by that? So, some people, some people didn't have the courage to come with me to AMGA. That was the safest, easiest thing to do, would be to resign and go to AMGA. It was career suicide.
That's what Marcy Maxwell did.
So why would we stay with Project Veritas if it was not profitable, it was not cool, it was not trendy? Why would we do that, James? Why would I, the most loyal person in the world to you, who's not blood related to you, why would I and here's why. Is because I got into this business to tell the truth, okay? So when you say, I've never been married, what are you talking about? I've never been, okay, if Penny Lane had found out from Katie Hobbs that Katie Hobbs, had, an $11,000, birthday or something, and then she had the campaign pay for it so that she could write it off, and not have to pay for it. Wouldn't James say that's a story? Let's publish that.
Yeah.
Hello.
February 20th is when he went from being maybe February 6th, where he went from being, radical truth as, the paradigm that guides him as a journalist, to the ends justify the means, and an activist in favor of, focusing on his own preservation and making himself this victim. That was an inflection point, because I caught him in lies quite a bit, but nothing that was so existential that would question his credibility as a journalist until that moment when we've been talking, Dan and I and the board had been talking about staging intervention, because he was off the deep end. And now it turns out, thanks to these Telegram messages, he was popping benzos like they were Skittles. So, that it accelerated so much worse.
But just to I forgot what I was going to say, which is, I forgot again. Anyway, go on.
No, that was literally from the That was the Tuesday or the Wednesday. The Groundhog's Day massacre was, I guess, February 2nd, because that's Groundhog's Day. Thursday. The 6th, I'll never forget, that 6-hour board meeting was on my birthday. So I'll never forget the dates.
Oh, yeah. Oh,
Yeah,
sorry,
for context.
That's what I was going to say. This 6-hour crucifixion, James sends it to me, and he's like texting me while I'm listening to it. He's like, "What do you think? What do you think? Or what do you think? What do you think?" And I'm like, well, I'm only an hour into it. There's 5 hours left to go. And he's like, and then an hour later, "What do you think? What do you think? Are you mad yet? Are you mad?" I'm like, I guess I haven't gotten to the part where I'm supposed to be mad. It's a whole bunch of people saying, "We love you, James.
Yeah.
We love working for you. We're proud to work for you. We want to continue to work for you. You inspire us. You're a great leader." Da, da, da. What? I haven't gotten to the part where I'm supposed to be mad. I guess it's coming. And then he's like, "You mad? You mad? You mad?" And I'm like, "James, it's a bunch of people kissing your ass." Well, not doing that, but basically saying, "We love you. We want to keep working for you. You can't treat us this way. And we want you to focus on what you do best," which James was always the one saying in the all hands meetings, "Don't put monkeys on my back. Okay, you are all leaders. Don't come in and, I need to focus on what I'm good at. And I'm not good at, he was the first to say, I'm not good with people management or whatever." So this was an opportunity for the people to say, okay, well, let James, you focus on being the brilliant visionary that you are, and let us help you with this other stuff, which I understand perfectly, because when I'm direct, my background is film directing. I need a first AD to be putting out the fires and focusing on the logistical stuff, and a UPM and a producer to focus on things, so I can focus on the storyboard, I can focus on the talent, and I can focus on the vision. That so to me, it's having a producer say, "Hey, don't worry about where to put the C-stand. Don't worry about what the schedule and the budget. That's for us to worry about." That. To me, that was exactly the opportunity he had been begging for in all those all hands meetings. So the 6-hour crucifixion, the passion of the James. Okay, why has he not tweeted it once? If he was saying, if he's been teasing this harrowing 6-hour struggle session for a year, retweeted it. So that the world can feel your pain, and the world can go, "Oh my God, that's horrifying." It's like, no, it's a bunch of people saying how much they love James.
Yeah, and then after we finally did,
lie. Don't lie. We didn't get into this business to lie. We got into this business to tell the truth. It's bad to lie. Don't lie. So that's why I did not stand with James during this time.
Well, I want to make finally this gif of Christian yelling, "Don't lie."
Don't lie. Well, we finally put the meeting out, and he still did not address it, still did not retweet it, and all of that stuff. But to respond to some of what Christian said, I'll reiterate some of what I said in our last episode when we spoke with Callan, and I did listen to the entire board meeting. It was a while. I had to take little breaks and stuff because I could only listen to so much of that. But I did sit there and I listened to all of it. And my impression was I heard people who were deeply concerned. They all sounded deeply concerned about the future of the organization, and they wanted to see it thrive. They wanted to see it grow. They wanted to see it become better. They all expressed how unique they felt it was. They all expressed how grateful they were to be working there, but that the working environment had simply become unbearable to them, and they didn't feel comfortable enough going directly anymore to James with those grievances, which is why they had to go to the board. And that's part of the reason the board exists. That's part of the reason these organizations are set up this way. Yeah. And it's also part of the reason the decision was made to temporarily suspend his hiring and firing ability.
And spending.
Yes, and spending, and it was temporary because they wanted to protect the people who had just come forward to express what they did not feel comfortable expressing to him.
I had to explain to James so many times what a board is, what fiduciary duty is, and it would go in one ear and out the other. Is you work for me. I selected you people to do what I need you to do, to raise me money, to enable my authority. I'm like, you're missing the point entirely. If you're getting the privilege, and it is an incredible privilege, to raise money on a tax-deductible exempt basis, to fund operations on an educational mission, then you have to comply and comport with certain standard operating practices and procedures. He refused to accept that. That's one of the things I had to explain to him over and over again. Another one is how women become pregnant. I always explain to him how the sperm fertilizes the egg. Well, what's a sperm? I mean, it was like third grade health class.
The birds and the bees.
Yeah, no shit. I had to explain to what a cervix was, what the fallopian tubes are. Like, I mean, egg implementation. You know, the 28-day cycle, because he was banging all these chicks who slid into his DMs. And he kept thinking he was knocking them up.
Okay, well, just to go back to
that's an aside.
Well, just to go back to in the 6-hour struggle session, meeting, whatever. If you listen to it, James reads an apology letter, which he was allegedly, not allowed. The board literally says, "Yeah, sure. If you want, James, we're not stopping you. If you want to share that with employees." So why does he then 2 weeks later say I was prohibited? That's a lie. You don't lie.
We encouraged him. Also, after how hurt they were, it was like, yeah, you should talk to your employees and apologize to them. He used that letter, which I still maintain he did not write. I've read and edited his shit for 10 years. That was he never, had words in it like take responsibility.
Nevertheless, the fact.
I think it was written by Fettig, but
okay. Nevertheless,
Westcott's too much of a fucking moron.
If I need to change, and that's what he called me. On the, at 5 a.m. I was in Michigan. I was woken by James on the telephone. This was hours before the board meeting, and he's in tears, and he's saying, I'm sorry, I haven't been a better friend, a better leader. I want to change. I need to change. And I'm like, James, don't worry about this. We'll get through this. I've seen James knocked on his ass, and I've always seen him get up a better man. After New Orleans, after CNN Love Boat. And I was like, this is just a humbling experience. We all have to be humbled sometimes. So
nobody calls it Love Boat, dude.
CNN Love Boat. What do you mean?
It was CNN Dildo Boat.
Dildo Boat.
Nobody knows what you're talking about when you say Love Boat. They think of the show from the 70s.
I pronounce it Dildo Boat. Anyway, but he says in the apology, I need to change.
Yeah.
Because if I don't change, then PV will no longer exist. Like he literally says, I need to change about it.
We'll lose PV.
Is making fun of Lithium's, grievance and saying the most ridiculous thing that I did, my audio didn't work. It's like, first of all, that's not even what it says. That's not even what Lithium says. Okay. Second of all, two things cannot be true at once in this case. If all these grievances are so preposterous and ridiculous, then what were you sorry for? Why did you draft an apology letter if these are such ridiculous grievances?
Yeah. Everything was a device of coercion and manipulation.
And not a single Tim Pool, Jack Bissett, none of these people thought to ask this. Wait,
they didn't want to, because it's about clicks, clout, cash, and cult. They didn't want to. Michael Malice, Ben Shapiro guilty of it as well. Michael Knowles, Megyn Kelly.
Deadly afraid of offending their audience and losing views because that's directly tied to their income. We don't really have income that comes from this, so it's
important to know too that that during that board meeting we were, and I know the board wanted to solve this, right? Like we wanted to move forward. Of course. It was very, very clear. And again, I was not on the board. I was close to the board, close to Matt and close to the rest of the board members. And I think I had influence with the board, but I was not on the board. But that meeting, I think folks should also understand the context. The meeting was on a video call and audio. So everybody was pretty much on audio and not necessarily facing each other, except for three of us. Me, James, and Tom, our CFO, were in the room and looking at the screen. It was an awkward 6 or 7 hours, like really, really, really awkward. To the point at like 5.5, almost 6 hours in, I almost unmuted myself and with the rest of everybody and just said, everybody, stop. Like I almost like, uncle, like enough.
Yeah.
And I regret at the moment, between February 6th and February 20th, the regret went away after February 20th. I regret, as we left that room, Tom O'Hara was the first person to leave the room because he was closest to the door. And then James and I were sitting there sort of collecting our things. And I regret not saying something at that moment. Something like, that was rough, or like, are you okay? Like, we're going to get through this. Like, do you want to talk? Like, you want to get a cup of coffee? Like, and I didn't. I regret that. I did. And then February 20th happened. I wasn't there. It was President's Day. My son was off from school. I told him I was going to be home, so I stayed home. And the office was closed. And I watched James from our security cameras, which had audio from here, and watched this whole thing unfold, and listened to the lies. And I'm not embellishing. I mean, this impacted all of us very, very profoundly. And I'm not looking for sympathy from the audience here, but like I cried, like because it was at that moment where some of the lies that Christian just laid out that I realized, holy shit, there's no there's no coming back. This guy is a complete hypocrite, and not I didn't feel duped per se, but I felt somewhat stupid.
Yeah.
That I allowed myself to fall for this. Number one, I have no regrets because I have made some great friendships with some people who I have profound respect for. The people who I worked with some great people at my old firm, and really high quality people.
What was it called?
It looked like
Sorry,
the running gag.
Yeah,
but these people became really, really special to me, and I was proud to work with them.
Yeah.
And that's when it really sort of hurt. So.
Well, I'm glad you shared that, because go for it.
Sorry. Oh, no, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, the way it personally affected you, that is why I got involved, because I saw how it personally affected Callan, who's a friend of mine. And this is the thing that really upset me about how all of this went down, is like, no one wanted to even acknowledge that there were like 60 other people involved in this. And how could all 60 of these other people all suddenly be part of some giant conspiracy and turn against this one guy, as if, these are people. They have stories, they have jobs, they have paychecks. And then when it was all going down, I saw so many people online just, there were a few of the employees who started to tweet and to respond to people, and people just kept tearing them down. Well, you should just quit. You should just go join James. And I thought that stuff was crazy. I was like, guys, James, for one, doesn't even have a new organization yet. He didn't even start it yet. He has no money yet to pay these people. You are telling these people to just do the right thing, throw their paychecks away, forget about their rent and their families and all this stuff, and to just go join him. Why? Because that would make them the cool people.
And by the way, he was the one who abused them, took advantage of them, lied to them, defrauded them in so many ways. And they should, join with the mob with the digital pitchforks who say, no, rah, cult of personality. No, that totally wholly discounts. It shows you that Twitter breeds this cultist dynamic of bring out the digital pitchforks. I mean, I saw that better than anybody. We haven't even talked about, the people who did publicly exclaim solidarity with James, who hated James, like April Moss, or who was crying on my shoulder on Tuesday, February 7th, about how big a scumbag he was, and then was leading the charge to feed Tim Pool shit about me, about Dan, to get clicks. Or Ivory Hecker, who was doing all this shit, in between selling feet pics on WikiFeet. She was busy, saying, James is a hero. We need to stand with James. But when she was on a call with Dan, we have the audio of it. She's like, he's a monster. He tried to destroy me. He's a horrible human being.
Yeah, that audio is on our last file dump, by the way.
Yeah.
Well, I have a question. Why? How on President's Day? How did James's key card work?
He was let in.
He was let in.
He was let in.
Why?
There were people at the office.
He invited a whole bunch of people at the office. Yeah.
But he made it seem like there were 30 people in the audience. There was like 7 or 8.
We're missing the rhetorical question, which is, he had been ousted 2 weeks prior. How did he have access to the building? I can guarantee after Hannah me,
right. People were saying ousted. Yeah.
I wasn't even. I was locked out of freaking Telegram or Teams or whatever we were using. Okay,
That was just a malfunction on Teams' part, though. Come on. We have a running joke about Telegram versus Teams.
Why did no one ask?
As you wouldn't be surprised, is a huge in favor of Microsoft products. We're a little bit more guerrilla.
Why did Tim Pool not ask these questions? If James was
because Tim Pool's a beanie tard. I
Did
mean, the
not
dude
wanna
is
know
dumb
the
as a fucking
answers.
rock.
Well,
Did not want to know the
James was
answers.
ousted,
People don't want the
how does he
answers.
have access to the office to commandeer the office and the staff, and then and give a 44-minute presentation trashing the company that ousted him? I
guess because he knew.
after I was removed from my position after Hannah Giles, I would have loved to just waltz into the HQ
Because he
and
was
talk about how
he used that opportunity to lie, like egregiously to the audience, the public, in order to put out this bullshit narrative that he was ousted, when in reality he torched gasoline all over the place,
and lit
the match, and walked away.
You know when he chartered the LLC that became OMG? Between the 6th and the 20th. Before he gave that speech in the 20th. He had already checked out that evening of the 6th. He knew what he was doing. He changed the password on his personal Twitter. He was done. If he did not have his full authority, which was clearly in contravention of every single law that exists to protect nonprofits from being defrauded, he was gone. He was done. It did not matter. He went through some motions with some intermediaries to try and get revenge on all of us evil people who ran a coup against him. He brought in a hedge fund guy, John Thaler, to organize on his behalf to try and get rid of the board, get rid of the staffers who had, signed the letter and stood up and blew the whistle. Same thing. Charlie Kirk did the same thing. He tried to play that game. But, on February 20th, when he had that, 40-minute speech, within minutes, it was all of a sudden tweeted by Charlie Kirk, Benny B.J. Johnson, Jack Bozo Poso. I mean, they all had it within moments.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, there was nobody there who had a Twitter profile. There was, very, behind the scenes kind of people who went with him, who were part of,
the great irony here is all these people think that they're these some sort of dissident alternative media. No, they are just another,
No, they go like this to whoever has the biggest following.
Right. Exactly. That's all it is. Sycophancy and click chasing. Clicks,
clout, cash, and cult. The 4 C's.
Yeah. Well, the last thing I want to talk about, because we are almost on 2.5 hours now, is there's a couple things. We'll talk about the Kyle Seraphin stuff, but there's also, the Bohemian Grove stuff, which I find really interesting. And I wanted to note how curious I find it that not only did Alex Jones not talk about that story at all, he's actually been publicly defending James, and he was even defending the video that Kyle put out showing him, preying on the girl or whatever in the bar, basically just excusing that away as it's no big deal or whatever. And, I find it so incredibly hard to believe that the Bohemian Grove guy, the guy who broke that story the first time about this club or whatever in 2000, did not hear about James attending. That wasn't brought to his attention.
No, it was, obviously.
Why has he not talked about it when it was very obvious that James was not attending it to blow the whistle on it? He was attending it as a guest.
Yeah, and to raise money. It's all kabuki. It's all kabuki. And all these guys like Alex Jones, who, don't forget, what he was, indicted both publicly and judicially for, which was making up a mass shooting as conforming to a bias he had about the deep state and conspiracy theories, tinfoil hat stuff. And now he's, crying about his studio, and it's like crocodile tears. He starts crying, and then let's get to the next caller. It's all kabuki. All of these people have become leftists in the sense that the left is filled with double standards. If the left didn't have double standards, they'd have no standards at all. And that's what our quote unquote thought leaders, especially in the digital populist culture of the right, they also, the same thing. Charlie Kirk is a paragon of virtue. Yeah, right. He knew that. He called me, and we even talked about Bannon and Kirk and all the New York Young Republican Club, who called me and pressured me and cajoled me and coerced me and threatened me and said, you sweep it all under the rug. James is a hero. When personally, they all hated him because of his aloofness, his accessibility, his unfriendliness, the way he treated people, everybody, his staff, their staff. The guy had no real friends among the movement. Nobody liked him. I was the one hearing it for years. They talked shit about him every time they mentioned him. Oh, well, what PV does is amazing. James O'Keefe's a fucking asshole. Every one of them. Him and Charlie Kirk hated each other. hated. We have audio of, from all, because James, of course, every time he went to a conference, he was mic'd up with an entourage and multiple cameras at every angle from every point of view, from him tying his shoes, which mostly sometimes he made other people do, to taking a dump. You had to capture James O'Keefe, because as he said, the people want to see more James O'Keefe. He's a hero. He's a cult figure. He's iconic. And so, him mic'd up. I remember walking with him at Turning Point events, and you'd see Charlie Kirk in the distance. He goes, "Oh yeah, here comes this fucking asshole, Charlie Kirk." Hated Charlie Kirk. But, now publicly, there's no daylight. They, work together, to gin up the mob for whatever purpose, to, if it's, if in Alex Jones' case, it's selling duct tape and MREs. Turning Point, TPUSA event tickets, they're all working together in this grift that has become the conservative right-wing movement. And most of them know what James is. They don't really like him, but he's a cult figure to the masses, to the mid-wit masses that watch, Beanie Tar Tim Pool. So, I mean, these people, it doesn't matter what these people say. You can watch them reverse course 7 times, each way, and it doesn't matter. What they say in that moment will be what everybody galvanizes behind. And that's why we're so broken. That's why this story is so emblematic of everything going on the right. It's become a cult. It's not the conservatism of yore, where we believed an idea. We had arguments over trade and tax policy, foreign policy. It's just about cult of personality.
I like how you hit on that point too, Matt, because the larger story here that I see it as, is just like somebody on the sidelines observing, is the micro versus the macro, like the collapse of PV and James as the charlatan narcissist creating this pseudo image where substance is lacking, is what's happening at the global scale. It's just, we've got a cadre of billionaire psychopaths who are playing the role as James O'Keefe. It's just, here we're seeing the drama play out on a small scale within one organization, when the same thing is happening scaled up at, a much larger global scale, on the order of countries and international organizations. So that's why I think the story is so important. It also gets to something I like to, hit over and over and over again with my activity online: personality and character disorders, like the cluster Bs. So the narcissistic personality disorder, histrionic, borderline, the antisocials, which is sociopathy and psychopathy, and which I think I missed one. But the whole point, like, people don't know about these personality disorders. They don't understand the behaviors, the instability, the inability to take feedback, and reacting crazily when somebody says no or puts a little bit of a boundary around your behavior. It's very important that the world grok these subject matter issues, because I feel like that's how we evolve as a planet into whatever we're going to be, and not some hellscape where psychopaths turn us all into slaves. So, sorry.
No, when I told James, about, all the musical interludes in 1718, and he's like, "Don't shit on my art," and it was a giant fight. Now, ultimately, there was some change that was galvanized there, but that was the nastiest exchange we'd had, in this previous 7 years since we'd known each other. When I had Steve Bannon, who I was super close to for years, I did War Room during Brazil 4 times a day for 3 months. Nuts. There's a guy who I've known long before he was ever famous. I was writing for Breitbart, and the guy who really spent a lot of time with. And then he tells me to fucking sweep it under the rug, and I'm like, no, I'm not going to sweep it under. This is not your ass on the line. And by the way, he said things like, "Who cares about the law? You think we cared about the law at Breitbart and the White House?" I'm like, well, that's why you have the problems you have, which you seem to enjoy. But we have 70 employees and an organization, and our ass is on the line with treble damages for breach of fiduciary duty on liabilities created by a nonprofit board for not overseeing an out-of-control chairman, CEO, founder, and president, who we were trying to check. To not do these things. And, bulbous weasel, grifter, sociopath Steve Bannon, who's going to die in jail, saying sweep it all under the rug. And then, no. And then the next day does a segment about me on War Room that I have to be destroyed, that, nobody on the board, i.e. Tyrmand, and says me by name, will ever appear on the show again. They need to be run out of this movement. Well, how many death threats did I get, the coming weeks? Shit tons. So, I'm obviously, my ass is pretty chapped at watching the duplicity and hypocrisy of our conservative right leadership, Steve Bannon, Charlie Kirk, Benny Blowjob Johnson, all of these absolute fucking weasels who have Jack Posobiec, who have pillow codes, and they will, they'll lie, cheat, and steal and tell you, like, H.G. Wells, or what was it, the Orson Welles, the War of the Worlds on a radio broadcast, we're about to get destroyed by the pillow. Yeah. Use my pillow code, buy the pillow. Our New York Young Republican Club, all these people hated O'Keefe personally, but they stood by him. They made a public statement. We stand with the hero, James O'Keefe, and they knew. So it's like, this is what truth's a bitch. It doesn't conform to what you want it to be. It is what it is. That's why, all the pent up stuff that we're talking about now that we've talked about offline, and obviously Christian, Dan, and I lived. I mean, Dan and I, for months after, while we're trying to clean shit up, we're talking till like 4 a.m. I mean, we had like 3-hour conversations every night while we're trying to figure out who was fucking us which way and which other way, who was taping in the office, who was trying to create a mutiny, and you look at the people who went with James, there were people who were A, not in the office, B, all were huge believers in QAnon and whatever other retardation that is, cancerously moving through the veins of the conservative movement. The midwittery of it, RC was the only one in the office who had like any role where we'd see sort of the gyrations. He hated James as well. I mean, he had had a blow up with James a few months earlier and then left because he said, I have to protect my brand.
Yeah, well, I believe there were some messages. I don't know if we shared it in our file dump, but I remember seeing them from Callan, in which RC was in these group chats with the other employees expressing grievances against James, and they were even discussing doing some sort of like a strike or whatever.
Yeah, and that's what happened.
I told the board. When everybody got back from Vegas, RC took me aside and said, "I really have to talk to you." James laid into him in front of donors and the rest of the staff, and James was completely inappropriate. And RC was really upset, and I talked to him. I think I helped to don't come off the ledge, and but he was ready. He was prepared to leave, whether that was real or not. It felt pretty real at the time. Obviously he's got some. I can be highly critical of him too, but yeah. So I think that there was a lot of angst for sure, and I think again, even looking at Holy Thursday, when James came back to the office and I let him in, his COO at the time called me and asked me, like, could James stop by to pick up his passport and birth certificate in the office? I knew damn well that neither of those items were in there, but maybe maybe they're in the safe. I don't know. And it was going into Easter weekend. I'm thinking, well, it was going into Easter weekend. I thought maybe he's traveling, so I'm very empathetic. So, and I'm also an optimist. So there was a part of me that thought when he came into the office, I knew we weren't going to hug it out, but maybe we'd shake hands and be like, hey, this is fucking crazy, right? But he literally, and yeah, you guys can share the video whenever, literally like pretended I wasn't there. Until he decided to start talking to me, and quite frankly, I think until he realized that he had his recording turned on, right, his audio recording. Now we're Project Veritas, with or without James, so we recorded the thing too, and we probably did a better job because we actually have video. And he brought, I think, 6 journalists with him to pick up his birth certificate. Don't know why you need 6 journalists to carry 2 documents. So, and apparently, by the way, the documents were sitting in those piles of documents right there. His passport and birth certificate apparently were there. He thought those piles of documents there have not moved since probably 18 months before I even got there. I didn't touch any of it. And by the way, they're on top of a DJ booth, like a DJ, because every good 501c3 needs a DJ booth.
By the way, having to actually, as employees, one of the complaints I got off record from people is like, he's making us listen to his DJing again.
Yeah, every now and again, he turned the office into like a club. And I was like, this is fucking awkward. And
nobody wanted to be there. People wanted to work or go home. It's time.
I got an hour and a half drive home. I got to go. See ya.
Nobody wanted to listen to him spin Doja Cat or whatever.
Yeah. So that was an interesting thing because the February 20th, solidified in me, but the optimist was kind of like, maybe we can work something out here. And then, you can share that video, I guess, but, and people can see, it was clear. And if you know James, you understand the undercover tactics that he tries to utilize, who people like Christian and others are actually way better at than him. He was trying to elicit me. He was trying to get me to say something that he was going to use against me. It was very, very clear to me from the beginning. I wanted to go back at him, and I decided not to.
And that was confirmed in that email. By what's her name?
By the COO of OMG. She said you basically went and accosted, your ex-COO, took a whole bunch of documents that you had no right to take. I knew everything that was in those documents. It was printouts of news articles, old crap. Maybe there was some tax filings in there from years ago, which is all public anyway. So I told him, take it all. He's like, I said, take it. I don't give a shit. Take it. And he said, they're all my documents. I said, okay, fine, take them. I knew they weren't his. I wasn't going to argue with them because I didn't really care because the documents were not important. And there was nothing proprietary in there. So when he started to take it, he said, this will be a lot easier if some of my team can come in and help. And I said, no. I'm like, that's not the deal. It's you. I'm like, I'll give you a hand if you want me to. And he said no. And then, continued on his way. But yeah, I think we came to a point where it was clear that he wanted to torpedo PV in a significant way. The project, the Pfizer narrative was very, very real. The rumor went around that I turned 50 as this stuff was happening. So in March, after all this stuff blew up, I had a trip booked to bring my family to Costa Rica. And I told the team, I said, guys, I'm going. I'm like, I'll be on the phone when I can, but I'm going. Because A, I need to get away. B, my wife's going to divorce me if I don't get out of here. And C, like, there's nothing I can do here right now. Like we're in crisis. I get it. But if I'm on the phone from Costa Rica versus here versus there, it's not going to make a difference for a week. So I went, and the rumor came back when I came back that, I was there to pick up bags of money. And I came back. I came back to the team, and the team knew me well enough to know that was bullshit. But
you're a
rumor
guy. You hate fiat currency,
right? Even that. So, but I did say, I said, as a joke, I said, guys, first of all, like I was not there for money. There were no bags of money. But second of all, if there was, I probably wouldn't have fucking come back. Don't you think?
Yeah.
Goldman Sachs.
So we struck our flag. Project Veritas, when we struck our flag in the information war battlefield back in 2009, it was in defiance of a cult of personality that was surrounding Obama. And at the time, conservative new media was this Wild West frontier, storied by ragtag desperados profaning the sacred cows of a Goliathan political class. Fast forward to 2023, and you have this resultant, cottage industry of right-wing influencers who had anointed their own incestuous sacred cows, woven their own mythologies, and enlisted their own group-thinking digital mobs. So we had, for that first 10 years, had braved against the hegemons of the left, only to be cannibalized by those on the right. And the team that stuck with Project Veritas for that 6 months, that few, we know better than anyone how pernicious the digital cult ecosystem has become. And we have the greatest scoop on that. We have the exclusive on that. And I have to say about the people who stuck with, in all my years with Veritas, and I say Veritas because not Project Veritas, because it was Veritas Vigils and then it was Project Veritas. From the very beginning, I saw every single graduating class. I worked with every single person that ever, came through Project Veritas, all 534,000 COOs. and that's just the COOs. And I can tell you the most resilient core team was the team that stuck, the ones who didn't cave into peer pressure, the ones who didn't want to be cool and want to be liked by Tim Pool and Jack Posobiec and all the, the ones who stuck by their principles and said, this is wrong. I refuse to join AMGA. I refuse to join an organization based upon a lie. I came here to do journalism. I came here to do the truth. I don't care if it ruins my reputation. I don't care if Tim Pool doesn't unfriends me on the Twitters. I don't care. What matters is I came here to do the work, not get credit for it, but do the work. And those people who stuck by it when we had this whirlwind, when we had this freaking zombie apocalypse at our throats, the very people that we were exposing pedophiles, groomers, we were exposing, crony corruption in the White House. We were doing the same exact level of journalism that we had ever achieved. It was the same exact level and quality of journalism that we were doing that last 6 months. And the brave souls that stuck together on that sinking ship, those are my family.
How many people?
Yeah.
How many people went? And I have it written down somewhere in notes, but we had a peak, like a high watermark of 70, 75 people. But when shit blew up, it was like 65 people. How many people went to OMG from PB? I think it's like around 8 or 9.
Yeah, I remember Callan saying
they're all
like
gone.
6 or 7. Something.
What?
One of them
I think
stuck.
But how many left in that initial QAnon diaspora of people who didn't realize what was really going on?
Yeah, we had like the Michael Scott Paper Company going on.
It was a trickle out too. They didn't just all leave out.
Well, most of them, the core that of undercover journalists who had never been at the office who went, it was like 5 or 6, and I think it was a few people from the office, like the RC, who we know as retard cunt. But it was like 9, 10 people. How many of them are still there, or how many of them lasted 3 to 5 months?
At OMG?
Yeah.
From what I've been informed, I think most of them are gone, right?
Yeah, they're all gone. They're all gone. They're long gone. I mean, we're through 4 iterations of employee cycles at OMG from what we hear from OMG. Even with, people who stood by James, the only board member that was kind of playing both sides of it was a guy named Steve Alembeck, who later tried to murder his wife.
And killed himself, by the way.
And then killed himself. Yeah. That guy, James would even say, but I have a board member who is kind of on my side here. Yeah, then he tried to murder his wife. Just kind of a telling data point. The crazies. Laura Loomer's still with James O'Keefe. Tim Pool will listen to him sing Mariah Carey during Christmas, like 4 octaves away, a cappella. And after like glass cracks and birds go deaf, goes, that's fucking great. That's a wild clip you guys should link to. That is maybe the total emblem of the cult, is watching the Tim Pool crew listen to James sing Mariah Carey a cappella and just absolutely butcher it and then go, that was amazing. So good.
I was just Googling the Steve Alembeck death. Yeah. So that was in October of 2023.
Yeah, so I jumped on a group, sort of a conservative movement group conference call in April or May, and Alembeck was on it and introduced James and said the board, who, by the way, he was on, and voted in favor of a bunch of the things like an audit and other stuff. He said James is a hero. He's totally maligned. And then like 6 weeks later, the guy tried to murder his wife and killed himself. And he was a guy who I remember him when he joined the board. He called me the second he was signing the board. He goes, when can I start selling the organization stuff? Like data from his company. And I said, Alembeck, never. You're not going to. That's not how this works. If that's why you joined the board, resign now. So instead, he monetized it another way. He put Project Veritas logo on his website.
Oh.
So, this was the one sort of loose link in doing the right thing. And we were watching that. And eventually, after this call where I heard him basically throw everybody at PV under the bus while he licked James' balls on a conference call, then I presented that to him. He goes, okay, I resign. Yeah, fuck you guys, whatever. And then he tried to murder his wife. So that was James's ally.
very interesting side
Tell you, it's like Falstaff meets King Lear for the more erudite of your listeners.
Well, and speaking of the Twitter mobs, the latest victim of James's Twitter mob, of course, is Kyle Seraphin, and I guess this will be the last thing we talk about. But Kyle was one of the whistleblowers at Project Veritas, and ironically, when he was introduced at America Fest a couple years ago, James called him the bravest person he ever met. So I think it is ironic now to see their beef happening. But from what Callan, recalled to us, Kyle didn't like James from the get-go.
Oh, no,
he didn't like him for day one. He felt like he was a diva. He didn't like how he was treating people around him and the staff and all that. And he was not for the dancing or any of that. Kyle
had no respect for how late he showed up to appointments. He just didn't give a shit about anybody. Then he watched him force a junior employee to tie his shoes for him. And then he's like, fuck this, I'm out. Yeah, and I heard that third hand from a donor who he had told that to. And then I corroborated it with others.
Yeah, the AmeriFest thing, Kyle and I were speaking, and Kyle said, he's like, look, if you guys ask me, specifically the journalist that, was sort of his, main contact during the whistleblowing and sharing some of these documents, they had built a very good relationship. He trusted her, and he really respected our team. And he said, if you guys want me to be there, and then specifically her, I'll be there, but I'm not doing it for James. I'm doing it for you guys. And it was very, very apparent. Yeah.
Well, now apparently James is painting a new conspiracy that Kyle was, leading the coup, and I guess that would mean you, Matt, and Kyle were both together as we
all buried the money on the beach in Costa Rica together.
I had
$10 million.
I had only talked to Kyle a couple times in passing when we were at whatever, I think it was Phoenix, Arizona.
Probably Phoenix.
The Turning Point. That was the only time I ever met him and talked to him. I talked to him in recent weeks after he dropped that because thought that was fascinating, and that what he put out there was, I think, important. I mean, the guy is, from what I can tell, a warrior for truth, and much like all of us on this call, he doesn't give a fuck what Tim Pool thinks about him. He believes in God, has a family that loves him, knows how to fire a gun, and he's given me some very interesting advice on that. Just a super sharp and honest dude who's a warrior for truth. He doesn't give a fuck what an Asperger narcissistic sociopath thinks when he's got a video of the dude who claims he doesn't get subjects drunk, gets a chick who shouldn't be at a bar drunk to get to Chuck Schumer's office and stands there while his scumbag buddy commits sexual battery. That was pretty disgusting shit. And I think if anybody had any doubt if James O'Keefe, had any level of morality or a soul, just watch that video and hear what he says. That was a wake-up call to a lot of people. That video was seen 7 million times in the first 2 days.
Kyle's been very upfront too about his motivations with this. People, of course, James is trying to spin it as some conspiracy.
CIA. He said he did a fundraising email about now the CIA is after him. Talk about the LARPing's out of control. Like, he doesn't know where truth meets fiction. And I think, even his mother and sister don't like him, and his father enables this behavior. Now they've hired a private detective to prove that I'm on Pfizer's payroll, because that's one of the lies they created. So now they're trying to back into it. Clearly, I'm not on Pfizer's payroll.
Well, if you get a nice fat check, share some of that with us.
No, I spent fucking 2 weeks during the Pfizer story, on Twitter Spaces for 6, 8, 10 hours at a clip, bashing big pharma because, I'm a healthcare. When I was on Wall Street, I was a healthcare analyst. Yeah. I still do, corporate finance work for healthcare companies. I actually know a lot about drug development and think Pfizer's a fucking abominable global corporate citizen.
So what you're saying is it's ironic to be accused of being.
Yeah, but it just shows you the depth of depravity of these people, like James and his father, like dealing with a private end. His father's an absolute fucking drunk, and his father called a board member's wife and threatened her, and said that if she didn't get her husband in league with James as the board dispute was brewing, maybe she'd lose her house. Maybe the FBI would be banging down her door, and it was a really nasty thing. So the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. James and his father are both absolutely evil scumbag people. I mean, there's no lie they will not entertain to further their agenda, which is to get James back on top of the rose petals being thrown at his feet. Now, he's organically trying to get there by goosing every tranny in D.C. and middle management. And that's probably not going to make, a new star shall make. But, these people are absolutely fucking out of their gourds. Well, they believe lies.
With all of that said,
Oh, I've got thousands of data points, by the way. We can go another 10 hours.
I guess, one of the questions I've been thinking, though, is, is there any possible way that James could like redeem himself to you guys? Like say if he apologized to you or if he owned up to this stuff. So you don't think there's any way you can mend this fence? Because I know some of you.
He's doubled and tripled down on lies continually.
Yeah, Christian and Matt specifically, you guys have a very long history with him. You can't see yourself ever say mending the fence or forgiving.
He used to say to me when we were on his boat, and he would say things like, "I hope you never, share the stuff you know about my private life." And I was watching him cheat on his girlfriend and his mistress with his girlfriend and his fiance, and then now we find out he's been spreading STDs around. The JOKPT who had access to all of his Telegram, found something from 2015 that shows he has STDs, and then he was telling his then fiance about it. And if he wants to sue me for defamation, you remember the Zenger case, James? Truth is an absolute defense. So, fuck you. You have done horrible, horrible shit to good, innocent, hapless victims, women, your employees, young people. You said to me, "I hope you never weaponize all the things you know about me against you." And I said, "Of course, James, we're friends, we're brothers. I helped you, build this organization. I've been in your corner all the way. I've been cleaning up your messes for years, despite knowing kind of what you are as a human being." And I always use this example. I've never said it publicly, but I'll say it to, I've said it to Dan, Christian, they know it, and friends, family in PV know it, because I talked about it openly, was, 10 years ago, I had cancer. He never once asked how I was. I knew at that point he did not care anything about any human being at all. Never asked afterwards, "Are you okay?" Didn't care. I understood that's how he was wired. He had this sort of Asperger's, didn't realize the narcissism was that deep. And those things are very weird to meet because they're kind of different things, Asperger's and narcissism. Somehow he's managed to, circle that square. So I knew we were dealing with some sort of special, beautiful mind. And I thought that it was just driven by the desire for efficacy, for doing what his creative mission was as a journalist. I didn't realize that until recently, it wasn't journalism. It was the desire as a narcissist to be a star. And so the journalism was the mechanism. He was LARPing as a journalist to get there. He wasn't a journalist, and we see that in the inflection of 14 months ago, and even the 6 months leading into that. It was all about him, whether it was the private planes, not the mission, banging the chicks, not the mission, going out and trying to find sycophants to replace board members who just tell him, "Oh yeah, you can fly around private planes, doesn't matter. You can treat people, your employees are your cogs. You get rid of them if you want, doesn't matter. They're expendable." And so when push came to shove, and we had this moment of truth where everybody got together, his abused staff who saw the shit he was doing, us as a board and an executive management team who were like, "Yeah, we're signing our names to this shit. We are now liable for all of his lies and fraud, that we now have to put some beyond guardrails." We've been trying to put guardrails in place for years. We have to drop the hammer a little bit on rule of law, reinstill rule of law here. And now he's going to create a totally fallacious framework narrative that has nothing to do with truth. That's not journalism. That is pure narcissistic, cultish, I need to be the center of the world personality. You see it now what OMG has become, with nobody, pushing back. We watched him do fake Instagram posts of, "I'm on the phone with an FBI whistleblower," and he was talking to the air, talking to an empty phone line while he was gesticulating wildly. And then, "Did you get that? Did you get that?" And post it. Everything is a lie in a performance. It's why he spent donor dollars on Oklahoma or fucking oligarchy or whatever other bullshit that donors were getting annoyed with, and then he would fire donors. Or when we told him, "Your girlfriend is dressing like an absolute trashy whore going to donor meetings in Greenwich, Connecticut with 70-year-old women," and they're like, "We're not funding this. It looks like, you're going to go out and spend our money on hookers and blow." And that's a very reasonable assumption when you see something like that. Or going to the court case in D.C. where she's dressed like she's going clubbing, and the lawyer comes to me, he goes, "You fucking get a sweater on that chick immediately." And I told her, "Get a fucking cardigan. We'll pay for it." This is not like Sunset Boulevard at midnight on Friday or Saturday. This is a D.C. court. And then James got angry at everybody, me, Dan, others. I got some donors involved where I'm like, "Can you talk to him? This is not a good optic. This is literally costing the organization credibility, support, its donors." And he said, "Everyone's scared of me. I'm so powerful. I'm so potent. I have this femme fatale." Nobody except him thought she looked anything but, something you look on an OnlyFans. She doesn't, she's a femme fatale. She's not a Bond girl. She looks like an OnlyFans model. In, Miami influencing, splayed out on the hood of a Lamborghini. I mean, it's and he thought that was powerful and potent, and everyone was jealous of him, that he had to be taken down because he used to tell, well, I think Dan and others, the height of his powers. He was punch drunk, and now we find out he was massively addicted to benzodiazepines, which we have the receipts on. So all we were trying to do was clean up a mess and protect us and the liabilities that he brought upon us. And so what did he do? Double down, triple down, did a fundraising email saying that I was jealous of him. And I told him again when he said, I hope you never weaponize this shit against me. I go, why would I? And then he tried to get me murdered. Then his lawyers told him, stop with this fucking Pfizer narrative because I'm getting death threats. I had to deal with the FBI for months early last year. I had regular calls with the FBI going over the death threats, triangulate. They had to go out physically to interview people sending me death threats because he was saying that I was bought by Pfizer. And then, Barry his kid had an active shooter threat phoned into his prep school because they figured out the name's not that, common. They figured out who's who. And so his lawyers go to him and say, you got to stop with the Pfizer narrative. And he goes, I'm not doing anything. I'm not telling anybody. There's nothing I need to stop. People are going to do what they're going to do. I'm doing nothing wrong. You're dealing with such an evil person. The ends justify the means. His world's crashing around him because he knows. I mean, we had an employee who was a very loyal employee to him who walked into something in New York, a bar club that's a hangout for the right on the Upper East Side. And he was with his father. There's probably some court thing or lawyer thing in New York that they came in from Jersey for. And he goes into this place, and our employee, goes and sees James as father. James looks at him, sees him for a second, looks away, doesn't make eye contact. They sneak out the side door immediately. James knows that the lies are catching up. Just like he said, to his girlfriend, he was going to punch me in the face when he saw me. He saw me in March. I gave him a head nod. He didn't make eye contact, and he tried to avoid me.
So, and some, you're just done with him, period.
No, I want him to be fully accountable because this is why I left Wall Street. I believe in truth and justice and accountability. And this is a guy who's the biggest fraud I've ever come across. More fraudulent than the fucking lefty dictators, collectivists and fucking Central European shitholes that I deal with. People, that are on foreign government payrolls. I have never met a bigger fraud than this guy who's willing to knowingly gin up a mob. Or he actually believes the bullshit like Laura Loomer believes the bullshit in her head. Laura Loomer should be, much like her rest of her family, who is institutionalized for schizophrenia. I mean, these people are in straitjackets. That's where she should be. She believes this shit. So either James knowingly is lying, or he believes this Loomer Tune style bullshit. In which case, he is a fucking cancer in society and on the right and deserves to be held to account. He destroyed 70 fucking jobs. Good people doing great work. If I ever was starting a company where I needed a manager, dealt with 15,000 people in my life professionally. Dan's the best manager I've ever met. We finally got somebody who was so far heads and above better than we deserved at the stage of our operation, and he became a scapegoat as well. Christian pioneered the undercover journalism. James didn't go in the field. When James went in the field, I mean, we haven't even talked about what happened in Mohawk when he threw other journalists under the bus. He went in drunk and scared away a bunch of teachers because he starts singing Oklahoma, and then blamed it on an undercover journalist who he dragged 3 states over that day to come there. And that was discussed in the board meeting. And he takes no accountability for this shit. Pass the buck everywhere. Blame everybody. I'm the victim. And gin up a mob of fucking Tim Pool watching midwits who say anything you do is a hero. I got Jackson Hinkle on my ass today because I talked about him and what he supports, and all I got is anti-Semitic bullshit all day. Do I lose sleep over it? No. But the midwittery we're dealing with this righty cult of Groypers and Steve Bannon War Room, and unfortunately a lot of MAGA, because it's not about ideas, it's not about right and wrong, it's about cult of personality, and this is really unhealthy. And James and Charlie Kirk and Michael Malice and Michael Knowles and Robert Malone writing an article, and he's another he's pharmaceutical Loomer Tunes. He is writing about that anybody who doubts for a second that Pfizer wasn't the cause of everything that happened in Project Veritas should have their head examined. Are you fucking insane? How does this person get a speaking fee anywhere? He should be in a straitjacket. These are not normal, fucking balanced people who look, soberly at fact patterns and come to rational conclusions. These people are nuts, and that's who the leadership of the right is. That's who still worships James O'Keefe. Smart people are getting the message. I'm getting calls all the time from his unhinged tirades. I'm going to get accused that I'm running an unhinged tirade, but I have all the receipts. I will never get over my skis and lie or fallaciously spin. Anybody wants to challenge me on anything, I'll bring the receipts, whether it's corroboration from all the other people who were there, or the spending, or the fucking media coverage that this right-wing cult has put out. You know, James, you're such a hero. How did this coup happen? And the laziness. Megyn Kelly's a serious journalist, supposedly. The laziness of it. Meanwhile, the abuse of women. If you don't think this dude was abusing women, watch the Kyle Seraphin video. That 19-year-old he's plying with Aperol spritzes when he knows she's 19 to get to Chuck Schumer's office, who later apparently had to get carted out for alcohol poisoning in an ambulance, who I hear is pressing charges, is proof positive. He looks at women the same as he looks at his employees. They're all tools for his pleasure, benefit, expendability, utilization. He's a evil person. And you know what? I took the shit for a year and a half. I know the truth always comes
You're describing the behavior of a psychopath or a sociopath to
he's a fucking narcissistic sociopath.
They're incredibly glib, manipulative, charismatic.
But Matt, if he's such a cancer on the movement, isn't it on you people at Pfizer to come up with a cure?
Very good. Very good.
If you want me to get into, Pfizer's cancer portfolio, their checkpoint inhibitors are weak, and that's another long conversation with Twitter space.
Well, I can already tell you the cure for cancer if you need it. Just FYI.
Well, now that Christian spoke, I wanted to throw the same question to Chris and Dan. Obviously we have Matt's answer. Matt's just done with this guy. But is there any way that you guys could possibly, I guess, mend defense with James, or if he ever apologized or whatever, would you listen to that apology?
Well, James based his brand on holding power accountable, and the whole purpose of this guy is
the alpaca.
Is to provide people, people received Retracto the alpaca as a reward for retracting, for taking accountability, for for issuing
correcting themselves.
And I don't get why. James needs to publicly say, I was not ousted, I lied, I'm sorry, I lied, I shouldn't have done that, I should not have. And the whole, he get specific, go into the weeds. He needs to go through that and do a run through of that 44-minute President's Day speech and pause it. And, every time he says something like, I was not married. Yeah. Okay. Well, here's the deal. I was engaged to be married. Okay.
I was cheating on my girlfriend. She called me. We called it the wedding.
That's immaterial.
That's the truth.
Yeah, but okay, the point is the wedding was going to happen.
The point is he, the wedding was called off, and he repurposed, rather than eat the $11,000 cost, he repurposed it for a Christmas party. It was a very fun Christmas party. I'm not going to lie, it was whatever. But for donor, I didn't know donor funds were being paid for it when it was actually originally earmarked to be his wedding venue.
Yeah, that's why he managed something so far afield. Get the $12,000 deposit back.
He needs to say, I lied about this, because he would expect the same from the very people that we confronted with Retracto.
So what you're saying is James needs to be handed an alpaca.
The alpaca factory would there's not enough lubrication for the machines to produce enough alpacas to deliver to. We'd have a dump truck of alpacas.
If you publicly lie, then you need to publicly apologize. One thing if he were to privately do, but fine, a private apology. But now you've ruined people's lives. He ruined people's lives. There's Project Veritas employees who are still looking for work. Okay, after and we're now entering summer. We all lost our jobs summer of 2023. I know people who are still out of work. Why? Because they did the right thing, and they stuck with Project Veritas. They stuck with their brothers and sisters in arms. They stuck in the trench. We stuck together. Okay. Well, why didn't you go with James? Because we had a job to do, and the job was to tell the truth. It was to get the truth to the American people. And what James was saying, James knows. He knows what he was saying was not the truth. If he didn't, and here's how you know for a fact that he knows, and it's actual malice, is the fact that he has not once, after spending a year teasing the 6-hour board crucifixion. It's now public. He knows it's public. I know he knows it's public. He knows we know he knows it's public.
Yep, he didn't even acknowledge it.
This is why he won't make eye sight with that employee at the beach cafe or me when I run into him in March and event. He won't make eye sight because when a narcissistic sociopath who has spread so much lies in defense of their own ego is confronted with the truth, you get like a cinematic fucking head exploding blow up. Everything crashes in within them. I imagine that when he's fully exposed, the dude's going to be on suicide watch. He'll need to be institutionalized.
Right.
Because he has spun so much fucking lies to so many people, so en masse, doubling down, tripling down, quadrupling down. When a little lie gets caught, he gets into a bigger lie.
It's kind of like
corroborated by everyone who's ever interacted with him.
He knew that when he was saying, "Oh, the board, you should demand that the board release the tape." He was basically pulling what JFK pulled on Nixon during their televised debate, where he knew Nixon could not tell him about what was happening in Cuba. So he says, "You're not doing anything about Cuba." It's like, yes, he was. He just couldn't say it. So James was pulling the same exact trick, where he knew the board was not at liberty to publish that recording. Okay, so he created this mythology like, well, if the board doesn't release the recording, the 6-hour crucifixion recording, then they must have something to hide. Well, no, it's out now. It's out now. Why aren't you promoting it? Why don't you want the world to know your suffering and your pain and everything you went through, having to listen for 6 hours to how you had treated employees? Okay.
Clearly, it doesn't paint him in the sympathetic light that he wanted people to believe that it did.
Right. It was every single person being sympathetic towards him and saying, "We love you, James. We want to keep working with you. We want you to continue to lead." Even the board members are saying, "We need you. We need you to continue to lead this organization," including Matt Tyrmand was saying that. Okay. So why? So that tells you right there the fact that he spends a year teasing like this, the MacGuffin, the board tape, and now it's out, and he hasn't once tweeted it. What does that tell you? It's because it doesn't back up his narrative.
He tweeted, "I'm jealous of him," and I'm definitely not jealous of him. And by the way, the right sentiment would be envy, not jealousy. But
yeah, well.
So I don't know. So my thing is hold yourself accountable. Like if you've been, it's your brand.
What you guys don't get.
Hold yourself accountable. Apologize for lying, and for all the reputations you destroyed, and all the people who served you, people who trusted you, people who loved you. And I never stopped considering myself James's friend. But sometimes the definition of friendship is the opposite of enabling.
Yeah. We all probably enabled too long.
Well, you guys were definitely his friends. One thing I wanted to bring up was, I read an email, I believe, that Matt had composed. I think we may have shared this too, but it was to James, and it was very heartfelt. I remember reading that, and I'm like, wow, this guy sounds hurt. Like he's really hurt by all of this. And I saw a friend desperately pleading to their friend.
Yeah, I was hurt by his actions and what it did to, this organization that we all worked to build. And also I was hurt because what he was doing to these people who were calling. I was getting calls for the previous 9 to 12 months from people like this was careening toward disaster, which is why we were trying to figure out an intervention. And then he fires Tom, and the intervention is now mandatory. He was triggered as a mandatory event with that board meeting. But I was talking to the board member. I was talking to Dan. We're talking to other friends of his, like friends that were sort of like avuncular, not like he has no real friends as peers because he only looks at people like the only friends were me and a guy who was going to be his other groomsman who I think was selling him steroids. So that guy was like his longest friend from LA, and they lived together in LA years ago. But all of us here in the New York area, which is where I was, for all these years, we're trying to figure out how do we stage an intervention to like say, dude, chill the fuck out. You're doing things that are not only bad for you, but bad for the organization, bad for your employees, bad for everybody in our orbit, bad for our ideas, bad for everything, bad for the journalism. Like, just take a deep breath, stop with the private planes, and let's just slow shit down, put, the right guardrails, because we had statutorily tried to put in guardrails at a board level for like the previous 3 years. He kept violating them. We had a board statute on private air travel, and he just ignored it.
So there was a lot of build up to everything that happened.
Yeah, I mean, and then he's the one who blew it up in the previous weeks.
Yeah.
And, and this blew up because he was in Utah with his girlfriend. He had met a donor, and they were on a ski trip, and he used that donor meeting to stay in Utah and Park City for a bunch of days and party, and then phoned it in on the work he should have done, and then yelled at everybody else, and everybody was about to go on strike. The whole leadership, like 12 or 15 people out of 65 or 70, were in on this call where he was skiing in Utah on PV dime after like another fig leaf donor meeting that lasted, one meal, one day, and then stays out there. And, our producers are trying to get him to film shit. I think he filmed something in sweatpants, and they were livid, like just phoned it in, didn't give a fuck. Everybody's time was worthless. Everybody's efforts was worthless while he was gallivanting with Yoko Ono, the OnlyFans model or whatever the hell she is, selling the OC. And then everyone's like, we're done. We can't do this anymore. After he blows up and blames everybody else for the fact that he's phoning it in and doing fuck all nothing. And, Tim Pool can say as much as he wants, but it's his shop. At a $22 million a year organization funded by donors, no, it's a New York State shop, it's the federal IRS shop, it's the state of Virginia where it's chartered shop, and it's all of the employees as stakeholders who do the work to get this shit out.
Yeah, he could have just made up a for-profit if that's what he wanted to do. But with a nonprofit, you don't just get to do that.
And we worked on that. We tried to actually get that into shape, and then he would spit out. But for-profit model is not conducive to investigative journalism, which is a philosophical and a technical argument that is very fair to debate and have. But then look, OMG, I'll never have a board again. I'm now an LLC model, and by the way, I'm funded by the wellness company. So I can sell you ivermectin or whatever other bullshit.
We literally, James and I happen to be on a podcast, Charlie LaDuff's podcast, like an hour before the board meeting, and I was gonna cancel because I knew the board meeting was going to be like things were getting obviously very volatile going into that, and I was going to cancel, but then I realized, you know what, if I go in this podcasting booth and I can actually close the door for an hour and not have to deal with anybody before this board meeting, and I just can go in the board meeting and whatever happens. So I wound up doing the podcast. Had 10 minutes before the board meeting, James called me into his office, and it was clear that he was trying to understand, where my head was at, and if I had any sense of where the rest of the boards, the board's heads were at. And in that 10 minutes, I did say to him, I said, listen, like, I think what you have to take this as an opportunity to reset, and let's think about that platform we've been talking about and how to sort of, commercialize your celebrity, right? He'd talked about that. And he wanted to do that. He wanted to do more creative things. He wanted to do more things. And we wanted him to do that. So we did talk about that, and I don't know if I understand where Matt comes from with the fundamental question of whether we would ever be able to forgive him, right?
Yeah, I was gonna ask you that too, obviously, because you unlike Christian and Matt, Christian and Matt already sort of had like a public figure kind of involvement in political social commentary world, but you seemed like you were just a very normal kind of private person, and then you ended up working for Project Veritas. And when all this happened, besides Matt, I would say you, Dan, got the most blame for what happened and accusations of being behind all of it.
Barry got pretty hard.
But obviously James never corrected that stuff either. So like, if he admitted these things, if he apologized, like
no, he actually said to a presidential candidate, Vivek Ramaswamy, that he'd never hire another Goldman. He didn't use my name, but he sort of disparaged me without using my name. I'm like, great.
He would not hire another Goldman Sachs.
Another investment banker or a Goldman Sachs guy.
Okay, so there's something I do agree with him on.
I was about to say that. I'm like, look, Matt, you guys agree with something.
No. I love Goldman.
But I think similar in many ways to Christian. Like I'm not a super religious guy, but I do believe in forgiveness. And when I was young and right out of college, I sort of woke up on the top of the wave. Not that I could surf, but I woke up on the top of the proverbial sort of, Wall Street wave, and I made a lot of money at a very young age. And and you sort of equate your IQ to your W-2 and think they're actually correlated, and they're not. And I think James,
Thank God, because I really do that right now.
and I think I was very lucky that I had very good friends and support system that that really kind of pulled me down to earth and said, you're not acting like yourself. You got to get your head right. And thankful that I had that support system before I got close to my wife and we dated and got together, because my wife would have never tolerated that either. But I sort of equate it in a way with James, and he made decent money. Don't get me wrong. At Project Veritas, he got paid pretty decently, but that it wasn't about that he got drunk on. He got drunk on the celebrity and the fame and the power. And I think many regards he kind of considered his IQ equivalent to that. And if he called me today after a public apology, like it went out there, like I think Christian would say, where he like actually like had an awakening moment, right? And really admitted, what he did was wrong and had this sort of epiphany, similar to how I did in my early 20s. I would take the call. If he called me today, I'd be pretty convinced that he's just trying to record me and elicit me. So I probably wouldn't answer. But like James and I didn't speak after the board meeting at all again.
I sent a message.
We texted him. I called him.
Yeah, what Dan said on the teams, he was begging James, please talk to your team. And we saw that James could see the messages, and James was talking to me during that time, and I was like, James, why don't you talk to the team? And he's like, I'm gagged. I'm like, no, you're not.
That was such a big fucking lie.
Yeah, I'm like,
that was like the big one.
You're gagged from talking to donors, okay, and you're gagged from disparaging the company. So literally, the only things he was gagged from doing are the things he did, and the things that he wasn't gagged from doing, talking to his freaking staff, he refused to do. That's
by the way, a relationship
on all those leadership books. Where does it say to abandon your staff and ghost your own staff and lie and say that you were gagged, but then do the exact things that you actually were gagged from doing?
Well, the irony is that, with donor relationships, they exist as, it's a very nebulous thing. Is it a professional relationship? Is it a personal relationship? These things start to, intertwine. And, there was no enforcement that if a donor called him and, said, are you okay? You couldn't have, a back and forth. But if you were a fiduciary and you took your role honestly, as an honest broker looking for, effectuating a positive outcome for all, even have some contrition, you just say, hey, it's a complicated situation. I can't talk about it. And you say, but I'm okay, or I'm struggling. I appreciate, you reaching out. There's no enforcement on that kind of stuff. That's an honest thing. What he did is he picked up the phone and he called every donor and said, they're plotting against me. I think Pfizer may have bribed them. I mean, the most bullshit you could ever conceive of.
Right.
I mean,
and that was also his same reason
Laura Loomer style bullshit.
But that was also his reason for not showing up to the second board meeting on Thursday. I'm gagged. It was
Friday. Yeah, it was Friday.
I'm like, James, I don't think that if you show up to the board meeting, the second board meeting,
he was still on the board.
You're going to be like, gotcha, you're gagged. You're not allowed to show up to the board meeting.
It was Friday, February 10th. He was still on the board. And the reason he didn't show up is because he knew what that board meeting was about, which was going into finances. And he wanted no part of participating in that and digging himself deeper by having to lie or being caught.
And here's another thing.
This is where it gets to. He gets caught. He can't face it. And that was going to be a face down on the truth.
I was telling James, okay, I was saying to him, again, why don't you sue? And he's like, I'm going to do something even worse. And I was like, what is that? And he's like, you will see. And I'm like, why don't you sue?
Every tranny in Washington.
If your company that you built with your own bare hands by yourself is being pulled out from under you, why are you fighting a little harder to save it? What kind of what kind of resilience?
Well, what's funny is he lied to a bunch of donors.
Project Veritas is your baby, then freaking fight to save it.
He lied to a bunch of donors, and he got them to issue us demand letters from Troutman Pepper, a law firm that one of the donors used to be a partner at, and they sent us all the shit that in the state of Virginia we're violating the mission drift, and we're in breach of the different rules for chartering a nonprofit, and we're going to go to the state AG. And I remember when I read the first demand letter, and we all jumped on the board, and Dan and I said, "This is great. The state of Virginia is going to pay for an audit. What a fucking win!" And then, of course, it was all impotent, theatrical, kabuki bullshit. They never filed through. I since spoke to that office, the Department of the Virginia Attorney General's office, who oversees, Secretary of State enforcement action, and they had gotten a letter from them, and they said, "We just could smell that where there was smoke, there was fire in this, and we were not going to be used by these people. Like, we just wanted nothing to do with it." And I was like, shit, I wish they would have come in. We were all about, please open us up. We knew there were issues we were trying to rectify and remediate. You guys do it. You guys pay for it. Would have saved PV, $200,000, $300,000, $400,000 that would have been several more months in burn to pay salaries of good people. Not me. I wasn't getting paid. I was just trying to, get the lifespan going. We didn't even talk about, the Hannah months.
Yeah, we went into a bit of that with Callan. But
we have a lot more.
Yeah.
Where I was the center of the coup, Dan was the center of the praxis with Hannah. So that was more great.
Well, gentlemen, we are at 3 hours and 17 minutes, which is crazy.
Did we beat Callan?
No. we can do another one.
I think we may have.
That says we can't do another one later. And maybe have Callan back too.
I think we may have.
Why don't we put Callan? Why don't we make it more about free for all? I'll tell you, if you really want it, we have some other employees who I'm sure would love to weigh in.
I mean, we could organize some kind of live stream.
Town hall.
And town hall live stream, bring as many people.
Your last question about would you ever forgive? Now, nobody who really knows him at this point, especially seeing what they've seen, even before February last year, they were seeing what he was and they were not happy and not trusting. But after seeing everything that transpired the last 12, 14, 16 months, these people would look at him and be like, the malice that you enacted upon all of us while playing the victim. There's not only forgiveness. I joked with somebody, semi-joke. If you stuck him in a room with all the PV alumni and check the phones, he would not get out of there alive. This would be Muammar Gaddafi in the streets of Tripoli. There's a lot of people who would rip him apart limb from limb for what he did. I've got a few names that pop in my head. I would just, watch and record.
Metaphorically speaking, maybe.
No, there's a lot of people that have an anger. I mean, he destroyed, jobs, lives, missions, people, everyone. He was saying I was jealous of him. I've done my own thing for many, many years. I don't manage people for a reason. I like doing my own thing on my own. But there are people who are part of these teams, this dynamic, especially that lived, eat, slept, breathed this. And the rug got yanked from under them, and then they get attacked as they are the victimizer of that person who victimized them, who poured doused the gasoline and lit the match with such extreme prejudicial malice. It's like nothing any of us have ever seen.
It's the stuff of psychopathy and sociopathy.
King Lear, Falstaff, the Ring Cycle by Wagner. I mean, this is
well, I guess we'll see what happens with this. We'll see if he actually responds this time, because he didn't.
No, I think much like how he avoids people, in real life, he will avoid.
Well, just for the sake of fairness, I will once again invite James to come on and speak and share his side of things. If he wants to refute anything that Dan or Christian or Matt said, as Matt said, he has the receipts, so James better bring his own receipts.
Bring the receipts.
But he's welcome to share his side of things. So.
They don't. This is again like the framing here. What I'm seeing all and everybody's sort of under appraisal of the situation is y'all really don't have you need to read more Robert Hare. Is what I'm saying. What James represents is something that is so far afield from our normal mode of operation, because we have a wide range of emotion potentials and the ability to feel guilt and empathy and compassion and all of those things. What he operates on is more of a form of just sort of a hunger for a thing. And in his case, it's fame and clout and attention and that sort of grandiose personality. that he fuels with this sort of this illusion of being pursued.
There's
Christ on the cross.
Certainly a lot of red flags that indicate that sort of thing.
Well,
I'm not going to sit here and like diagnose him and say,
I'm diagnosing him. I'm saying he's a sociopath.
You're crushing it, dude.
and it's obvious. And like the way, like this thing, it's so important to understand this point. And if you haven't read Robert Hare, Without Conscience, it is the work, that really encompasses. It's short. It's a short read. It's very easy to read. And it gives you the full range of what you need to understand about psychopathy and the cluster B disorders really is how they devalue other people. They don't see us as people. They see us as objects to be used for their own gratification and self-aggrandizement. And to be able to recognize these people is literally the difference between life and death. And I think very shortly in the future, it's going to be a very important life skill. So
I watched in the last year, and then Christian and I talked about this because, I'm a movie guy. He's a film guy. There's a few movies that the parallels are like The Kane Mutiny, where Humphrey Bogart, plays this out of Captain Queeg, or Face in the Crowd, there's a whole bunch. What?
The one that's most uncanny is Howard Hawks' Red River. Yeah. Okay. Now, James is John Wayne's character in that. Okay, I'm probably Monty Clift, and Matt is probably Walter Brennan. And there's some points in that are just like, it's like I remember rewatching that movie, during the debacle. And I'm like, oh my God, this is like, it was eerie how similar some of this, how almost
I'm gonna watch it again.
Specific it was. And
Red River, 1948.
Okay. Yeah, directed by Howard Hawks.
Yeah,
everyone should see that movie anyway. Yeah. But yes, Matt named some good ones: The Cane Mutiny,
The Cane Mutiny,
on the Bounty, and
Face in the Crowd, Mutiny on the Bounty with Marlon Brando. When they deposed Nellie Bly, who was just incredibly abusive and was killing his own men. It's just like this is like something. And I got a little more religious last year, just like watching all this shit, just because I was like, you know what, I need a little centering balance of this, whatever shit we've seen now, as gross as it is, as grandiose as it is, nothing is new in the human condition. Somebody has seen it. Sophocles wrote about it, in the Oedipus trilogy. Like all of these things are the fallibilities of the human soul that exist since time immemorial, and cyclically every several generations, you get some of these stories that get told. I think this story should be told. Christian and I have talked about, movies and documentaries, miniseries, books.
I've discussed that too with Callan, like writing a book about this sort of thing. Like someone should do that.
I'm working on it.
You are? Well, it'd be fascinating. If you need help editing or anything,
yes.
Let me know. I'd be happy to review it.
It's pretty big because it's all about the conservative movement. It's this story as emblematic of what the cultism of the conservative movement has become. It's, full circle with the leftist sort of populist cultism. Now the rightist it starts here, you move here on political philosophy, and then all of a sudden you meet in the middle on the cultism. And that maybe is a pitfall of populism.
On that note, and we'll end here, this will be my one final question, because we've been going a long time. Like, what do you think we can do to change that? Is there any way to fix the conservative movement or get rid of this cult of personality thing that they're stuck in?
Promote critical thinking. And you guys have been such tremendous friends to us throughout this whole thing. The fact that you guys were able to connect the dots. I mean, look, this whole thing it brings out a facet of human nature that was exploited by the left, with Russiagate. This is, the fact that the right is just as, when it comes to it, is just as given to, crackpot conspiracy theories and idolatry.
Tribalism.
Authoritarianism is the word you're looking for.
Sure.
Authoritarianism.
I guess. Well, how would you say in this context, authoritarianism?
They sort of require a tribal structure to adhere to. So you both have people that project the illusion of leadership and people that need to glom on to some sort of external structure because they can't really exist independently. They have to have a group. They need to be part of a group in order to function.
They need an authority to follow.
They need an authority to tell them what is right, what is wrong, what is real, because the actual thinking is a superpower. Like there's just the range of humans that have the ability to actually judiciously judge fact from falsehood is small. It's like, so there's only a few of us that actually can do it well. And there's a lot of people that peddle bullshit.
And a lot of people,
COVID proved that. That's
exactly.
This is another example of a mass delusional sort of narrative take that whatever feels good is good. And okay, well, we want to go with the hero, not the nameless group, or that who's painted by a villain by the hero, whether it's critically thought through or not. And that's what we saw happen. But the problem is that I had many people coming to me saying, I saw what he was. I know without going deep into it, you guys were right, because I watched him careen toward this level of out of control behavior. But very few people had the intestinal fortitude and bravery and integrity to publicly call it out. Counted on two hands, and the public sphere on the right, those who, tweeted about and said, hey, hold on a second. Maybe the guy who does show tunes on donor dollars and takes away from the mission that an Aura C3 is chartered for is possibly running amok. And even with the Kyle Seraphin video, we saw how bad it was. A few more eyes were opened. Good people who are honest with integrity said, holy shit, this is a bad dude. And most of the people said, oh, she deserved it. She was a Chuck Schumer intern. She deserved it. Or James is a hero. Or he was set up. This is the federal government trying to set him up, getting him to get drunk, a 19-year-old at a bar, and take advantage of him.
Everything but Occam's razor.
Yeah, exactly. I always say this when I'm talking, trying to, instill a little wisdom just from healthcare, is that in differential diagnostics in med school year 2, you learn, when you hear hoofbeats, think horses, not zebras. It might be indigestion instead of stomach cancer. And that's missed on people, especially in the Twitterverse, where, the exotic is more click fun. It's more, let's embrace the conspiracy, or, whatever the cult says will pile on, because that's just more fun. The serotonin levels drip through that much quicker. Watch.
We just lived through a zombie movie, and zombie movies have their appeal too.
I don't really like that.
It definitely would have been more conducive to growing an audience for Brent and I to have taken James's side and to have, threw all of you under the bus, and my friend Callan and you, and
but you guys are
you all are a bunch of traitors and this and that. But yeah, we don't care about that sort of thing. We started this just to shoot the shit about what was happening.
Where's Oldro Swig right now? Who was like the tip of the spear the day shit broke. Or my favorite Alexander Muse, who blocked me as he was leading this whole thing. He's a nobody. Nobody even knows who this guy is, but he had some Twitter following. He's a keyboard warrior, but a little following, and James fed him stuff. He ends up going to work for OMG and then blows out of it as well. We hear from the abuse and the craziness that would follow. So he left there as well. And then James, we were screwing around, me and a bunch of employees, so I sent him a message on LinkedIn where I was calling him out and making fun of him. And it was albeit a little vulgar, but the dude's a douchebag who attacked me publicly and then blocked me lest I respond. So I called him some choice words. And then now James takes that message because I said, hey, Alexandra, and knows that this is a message I sent to Alexander Muse, and goes around, shows it to people and says, see, he harassed my girlfriend, Alexandra. But he cuts off the top that shows the avatar of Alexander Muse. Yeah. So that's the kind of liar we're dealing with, who knows that he's committing fraud, defamation, the fallacious behavior of spinning things to, get to obfuscate the truth. So when you say, would I ever forgive him? No, when I know shit like that, he's literally sending around a message that he knows is to somebody else and saying that this is me harassing, his OnlyFans girl, Yeah. So no, fuck the dude.
Well, we're 3.5 hours in. Everyone, thank you for watching. Matt, thanks for joining us. Christian, Dan, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your story. And James, I know you watched every word of this. I hope this was a really good, sophisticated information operation. Yeah. And, hopefully, that Fed check is a really nice one this time around, because Brent and I could really use that.
FYI, we tried to get on Tim Pool and debate him. This whole crew, we pitched this a few times to people, we knew bookers, and they ignored it. They refused after, they slandered Dan.
We've actually had a few guests on our Little Nobody podcast that ended up on Tim Pool, who were on our little show first. There's a few of them I could think of, like Billboard Chris, Gothics. There's a couple people who they were on our radar way before they even ended up on.
Well, I'm pretty sure Tim Pool's not going to have us on because, they don't want to get to the truth. They want the cult. They perpetuate it more than anybody. We literally said, when they bashed Dan when he resigned in, what was it, June last year, May, and we said, no, you just put out a bunch of bullshit. Christian and I are willing to go on, and Dan would go on, and they refused to even answer us, respond. I ran into Luke Rhetoric in Miami, and I called him out on that. He goes, no, but James is such a good dude. Who cares what he does? I'm like, Luke, you're a fucking idiot.
Yeah, it's a shame.
Funny, really funny is if somebody did to Tim Pool or Luke Rhetoric or James O'Keefe what they got famous doing, is that going up in their little face with the camera, being like, "Why won't you talk to your ex-board members on a public venue?" Or like, you know what I mean? Like that'd be real. That'd be hilarious.
Well, I guess we'll see. We'll see what this develops into, and we might end up talking to more people about this.
Well, and I think we would be happy to do another one, but I can't for a while because I'm fleeing to Europe. Middle of this week. So
That's right.
Fleeing to Europe. I'm fleeing in anticipation of the shit show this podcast will create. So.
He's gonna ignore
the whirlwind.
I'll be in the Highlands of Scotland with no reception. So by design.
Daniel and Brent, we appreciate what you guys do, and sincerely, we do.
This was a ton of fun. The truth always is, even if it's ugly. And Brent, your gesticulations are so freaking good. While any of us are talking, you have a parallel sign language ASL track going on. My favorite was when you go like this.
My favorite is this one.
Yeah, that's what I do, and I'm like, I like that point. That's a good point.
But thanks again for chatting with us, guys. Maybe we'll all get together at some point, have a beer or something.
That'd be great.
Yeah.
Like, comment, subscribe, come out to the island. I'll be back again soon. Love you all. Stay safe, stay sane. Bye bye.